Ah, LaserDisc. You've gotta love it, right? What's that? You have no idea what I'm talking about? Well, let me give you a rundown on what a LaserDisc is real quick, just to get you up to speed on the silver sensation sweeping the nation decades ago. A LaserDisc is a defunct home video format that coexisted with VHS tapes from the 1970s to the early 2000s. They were vinyl record sized silver discs that you could watch movies on. They were higher quality than VHS and far more reliable in terms of durability and the machines not gobbling up the movie when they get old and angry. The problem was they were expensive, and you'd have to flip the disc over halfway through to keep watching the film, since one half of a LaserDisc can only fit up to an hour of footage on it. Other than that, though, they were pretty cool. Since they coexisted with VHS tapes, nearly every single release on VHS also got a release on LaserDisc, and then some. One of the biggest names in home video during the VHS LaserDisc era was, of course, Walt Disney Home Video. People adore Walt Disney videotapes. So much so that they're willing to sell crusty old tapes of Beauty and the Beast for over $1,000 on eBay. I mean, there's a reason that there's a video on YouTube with over 1 million views, and it's literally just the previews that came on the VHS release of Bambi. These things were everywhere, and it was terrifying. But it's easy to overlook the fact that, while Walt Disney Home Video was a main tenant in the VHS market, the same thing can be said for LaserDisc, which isn't talked about nearly enough. Now, to be fair, that's probably due to a mixture of the unknown factor, no one knows what these things are, and the anti-nostalgia factor. They usually don't include previews to save disk space. Now, as you'd expect from a company as big as Disney, there were a lot of Disney LaserDiscs released. And I mean a lot. In fact, according to the extremely useful LaserDisc database, seriously, this is a really cool website, especially if you're a fan of LaserDiscs or any other obscure video format like CED or VHD, there were a grand total of 418 Disney LaserDiscs distributed in North America. Now, I use this database to pinpoint release dates for all these LaserDiscs, but there are a select few that simply don't have release years with them, which is fair considering the relative obscurity of some of these titles. So I'll simply be omitting them from the 418 discs we got earlier, leaving us with the ultimate total of 397 Walt Disney Home Video LaserDiscs released in North America between 1982 and 1999. So, because I'm bored, why don't we dive right in and take a look at every single one of these LaserDiscs in chronological order. Now, because there's so many of them, I've decided this will be a multi-video epic, where each video focuses on a specific year. In this case, we'll be taking a look at the 15 LaserDiscs released by Disney in 1982. But Devin, I hear you asking, why don't you just look at the VHS tapes instead of the LaserDiscs? They're a lot cheaper, and you'll appeal to a wider audience through that nostalgia factor. Well, you're absolutely right. There's just one teeny tiny problem. My tapes are falling apart and ready to blow up at any second, and watching hundreds of videotapes sounds like too much for my poor little VCR to handle. The LaserDisc player, on the other hand, I've had for almost a year, and it hasn't given me any problems whatsoever. Good job, little player. Prepare to be worked to the bone for a long time. One other thing before we get started, spoiler warning. I will be briefly discussing the plots to these films. So if you don't want to know the plots to these Disney films, then don't watch this video. You have been warned. Also, I'll be judging the discs based on two factors: the film itself and the contents of the disc. The film part is simple enough. I'm going to tell you what I thought of the film. The disc contents, on the other hand, are slightly different. What does the packaging look like? What are the opening logos? What are the bonus features? That's right, LaserDiscs pioneered the use of bonus features years before DVD started doing it. So we're going to have a lot to talk about with some of these films. But trust me, things will get a lot more interesting in that front once we reach the 90s. Not that things won't be interesting from the beginning. I mean, we're gonna be looking at some weird stuff. So I hope you're all ready for the wild ride that is a review of every Disney LaserDisc, starting with well, this is it. The first ever Disney LaserDisc. There was a lot riding on this release for the company. 1982 wasn't a particularly good year for them. They had been in what's widely considered to be the dark ages of Disney. This was a terrible time for them financially, so this jump into the blossoming home video market could have been what saved the company. All they needed was the perfect film, a timeless classic that people were desperate to watch over and over again. It was very simple since they had an enormous backlog of some of the most iconic family films of all time to choose from. So, did they deliver? Was this a home video release to be remembered? No? Alright, well, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here. First, let's discuss the packaging. I like it. It gives off a cool late 70s, early 80s Burger King style look with the 3 stripes right here, and the use of the Sorcerer variation of Mickey is now iconic amongst videotape owners as he'd basically become the Walt Disney Home Video mascot. I also like the use of the text, "The magic lives on." It really hits home just how important these releases were. Before this, you'd have to wait years between watching Disney films since you were limited to whenever they hit theaters again. But now, the magic is living on in the form of home video. Also, it's worth mentioning that this film is 2 hours and 8 minutes long. But you may remember me saying that discs could only fit up to an hour on each side. So what they did is they split up the film equally into 3 sides, meaning 2 discs. Because of that, there's some tiny text right here that says 2-disc album. I don't know why, but I find that weirdly endearing. This will be a common trend throughout these discs, as we'll soon see. Now you may notice that this is called a laser video disc, not a LaserDisc. That's because this disc is so old it wasn't even called LaserDisc back then. That's pretty weird. This bottom art is terrible. I mean, it gets the point of the film across, I think. There's a green dragon with a tuft of red hair and floating heads surrounding it giving weird faces. This is a genuinely terrible first impression, and the screenshots on the back, well, they aren't much better. But enough about the sleeve art. Let's pop this sucker in. We press play on side 1, and the first thing we see is a super 80s looking logo for Laser Vision? But I thought this was called Laser Video Disc. Well, turns out it's one of those Kleenex tissue paper situations where LaserVision is the brand and Laser Video Disc is the name of the disc itself, except in this case, LaserVision was the only brand, so make of that what you will. And now, to further drive home the fact that this disc is super old, we get the oldest FBI warning logo I've ever seen. I mean, we're all familiar with the green one from the 90s, right? It's iconic. A slightly lesser number of you may recognize this red one from the late 80s, but this is the first time I've seen a blue one. This is weird. And it's not done being weird. Just look at this early logo for Walt Disney Home Video. The whole thing reeks of the early 80s. Also, it calls the company Walt Disney Home Entertainment when literally everything else calls them Home Video, but whatever. And finally, we get into the film itself. What's it like? Well, let's find out together, shall we? So the film finally begins, and we get a 4-minute long opening credit sequence paired with some classic Disney string orchestral music and some pretty bad looking paintings. Whoa, Dr. Eggman's in this film? No way. After that, we see a ginger kid floating through the woods, stage whispering to nothing.
Stop swinging your tail, you almost knocked me down.
I'm hooked already. Turns out he's running away from this abusive group of hillbillies that adopted him for basically slave labor. They look like a dirtier version of the Fratellis from the Goonies. And then they sing a song. Oh boy, do they sing a song. It's a bad song, I don't like it. But the kid, named Pete, runs away thanks to his friend, a big green animated dragon named Elliot who can turn invisible whenever he wants. I really like the design of the dragon. He's giving off a lot of Don Bluth vibes, which I can totally get behind. Although the noises he makes do take some getting used to. At this point, when they start singing a pretty cute song together, I realized this was going to be a musical. I usually like musicals, but the first two songs have been either pretty bad or just okay, so we'll see how that improves. They do a decent job of combining the live-action characters with the animated dragon, but there are moments that definitely look a bit rushed. This was definitely a lower budget than Mary Poppins and is a far cry from what we'd see later in the decade with Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Although it's interesting to point out that one of the guys who did the animation for this film, Don Hahn, actually went on to work on Roger Rabbit. That's really cool. Alright, before we continue, I should discuss the elephant in the room. Here's a screenshot of Pete's dragon from the Disney Plus version. Looks pretty good, right? Well, here's the same shot on the LaserDisc version. Now, besides the noticeably worse video quality, you may notice something else. It's not in widescreen. That's because when this LaserDisc came out, every single home television was a square shape rather than a rectangle. So they trimmed off the sides of the film so that would properly fit people's TVs. Now, this isn't a big deal with a movie like this, but this practice, called pan and scan, was used all the time, especially with VHS tapes. So you're never really getting that theatrical experience when watching a film on an early Laserdisc like this. So Pete wanders his way into a town called Passamaquoddy, where town antics ensue thanks to Elliot. They meet Mickey Rooney playing a drunk weirdo who sees the dragon and gets so scared that he runs into the pub and starts up a mediocre song with mediocre choreography. Town antics have ensued and Pete and Elliot run off to hide in a cave. This lady, named Nora, finds Pete and takes him home. Then they sing a calmer song together, and this is easily the best song so far. It's Not Easy hits that 70s children's song aesthetic perfectly, and I didn't even know that was a thing until hearing this song. It was during this song that I noticed some strange artifacts on the screen. Turns out this is because this is a very early film transfer and no digital remastering had ever been done at the time. So we get all those cool looking film reel scratches that you don't often see anymore. I really like the look though, it gives off a very vintage feel. And out of nowhere we see the main villains of the film and easily the best characters. It's this snake oil salesman and his assistant who come to town, find out about the dragon, and want to kill it to harvest its parts, since apparently different dragon parts can heal all kinds of illnesses. These guys are great. Compared to the rest of the film, they're very energetic, have some great emotions, and even have a decent song to start things off. When they first showed up, I actually let out a sharp exhale of laughter from my nose, which hadn't happened yet in this entire film.
I hear birds chirping.
So they finish their song, and oh wait, it's time to flip the disc. I'm gonna have to get used to that, aren't I? And now we unfortunately come across a drawback of watching LaserDiscs. See, when I was talking about them earlier, I feel like I made them sound like they were perfect. Well, I forgot to mention one little thing called laser rot. See, the two sides of a disc are actually held together with a special type of glue. Over time, that glue can actually rot if in the wrong climate and take the movie along with it. In this case, my side 2 is dealing with what I think is early onset laser rot. I say that because the audio is pretty rough. Take a listen, if you dare.
And we'll be ready for the night.
Sure. Before that, I'd like to show Elliot my new suit.
It's only on this side though, so it's not that big of a deal, but around 40 minutes of the film are affected by this, and that's not fun. Now, as the film continues, the songs do get a lot better. They're still a bit hit or miss, like There's Room for Everyone kinda sucks, but Candle on the Water and Brazzle Dazzle Day, which are probably the most iconic songs from this film, which is sad because they're still not iconic at all, I actually really enjoyed. Nothing much happens on side 2, but on side 3, the hillbillies come back and they sing another song. Thankfully, it's not as bad as the first song, but these characters just aren't very funny to me. I don't know why, they just aren't. It feels like they start setting up a falling out between Pete and Nora right before the climax, when Nora tells Pete he should be more realistic and stop talking about the imaginary dragon she has yet to see. But thankfully and surprisingly, it dodges that cliche by making both characters act reasonably towards each other. It is a bit odd that Elliot is a real creature. Going into this film, I had a feeling that Pete's dragon was going to be his imaginary friend who was there for internal emotional support, but that's simply not the case. Elliot interacts with the townspeople quite a bit leading up to the end of the film. So the villains try to hand Pete over to the hillbillies to get the dragon. Hijinks ensue, they don't get the dragon, the main villain blasts off again while they literally use a goofy sound effect. And we get a random ending completely out of left field. Nora's long-lost fiancé Paul, who went on a boat voyage a year ago, has returned. He got caught in a storm and woke up in a hospital with amnesia. But then, thanks to Elliot, he got his memory back and they can all live happily ever after again. Yes, it's as out of nowhere as it sounds. And that's Pete's Dragon. Overall, it was an alright film. I enjoyed the story, the music could be pretty good at times, and I liked most of the characters. It's just not something I'll watch over and over again, you know? Why, out of all the films Disney had made up to 1982, did they choose this one to kickstart their home video venture? This film, like a lot of other films Disney made in the 70s, did terribly in the box office and wasn't successful at all. They could have brought in Pinocchio or Mary Poppins or something, anything but Pete's Dragon. I don't know if this disc sold well or not, but if it didn't, they had no one to blame but themselves for choosing such an okay movie as the pillar their entire home video market would rest on. What the heck, Disney? Well, here's to hoping that whatever disc comes next does a better job at representing what Disney is capable of. Not that Pete's Dragon did a bad job, but there were certainly better films out there. So, let's see what comes next in the Disney LaserDisc library. Well, this is an interesting choice. With Pete's Dragon, I feel like a lot of people are at least aware of the film. They may know nothing about it, but it exists somewhere in their mind. Deep in their mind. But did you know that Pete's Dragon got a remake in 2016? Yeah, I didn't either. It's one of those extremely forgettable recent films, such as Skyscraper and Abominable. But I feel like the opposite happened with this film. Lots of people are familiar with the 90s remake starring Lindsay Lohan, but not as many people are familiar with the original version, which is this one. The original Parent Trap predates Pete's Dragon by over a decade, releasing all the way back in 1961. Now, this was back when Walt Disney was still alive, so maybe we'll get a more magical feeling with this film, though I highly doubt it. It stars Hayley Mills, who... well, actually, I don't know anything about her, but she seems nice, though. This bottom art is worse than Pete's Dragon. Pete's Dragon's artwork was at least a bit explanatory. It was a cropped version of the original movie poster, so it makes sense that it would show the dragon and the main characters with their different reactions to the dragon. It's actually way better than I gave it credit for earlier, and that's because I now know just how lazy these covers could get. This is literally just a screenshot from the movie, and not even a very good one. It's just Hayley Mills staring dead-eyed at herself. It's all blurry and grainy because it's taken directly from the 16mm film print, and I just don't like it that much, okay? You'll also be delighted to know that this is another 2-disc album. That means this film is over 2 hours long, and most likely nothing happens in the entirety of side 2 of disc 1. But hey, that's just me guessing. How about we actually watch the movie? Well, we don't have the best first impression. We've got some pretty bad laser rot on side 1. The audio is extremely staticky, worse than what we had with Pete's Dragon. But we can live with it for the first 40-odd minutes. So the film begins, and oh my goodness, stop motion. Okay, for those of you who don't know, stop motion is my absolute favorite form of animation. The amount of work required for it is extremely commendable, and the slightly jittery animation adds a certain charm that I really like. In this case, it really does feel like an old Rankin and Bass Christmas special with the stop-motion style used, which is interesting since this film predates the first Rankin and Bass Christmas special by 3 years. So if you aren't familiar with the plot of this film, it stars two twin sisters, Sharon and Susan, who were separated from each other when they were babies after their parents divorced. By sheer coincidence, they meet each other 13 years later while at a summer camp. We're only 10 minutes into the film and they already hate each other and pull pranks on each other. Sharon even calls Susan a bastard at one point, which I definitely wasn't expecting from an old Disney film. But they reach a breaking point after getting into a fight at the most swingin' 60s party I've ever seen. It's kinda weird that the kids brought their best suits and dresses to summer camp without prior knowledge of the dance, but whatever. So as punishment, they're put in the isolation cabin, and that's where they begin to bond and eventually realize they're actually twin sisters. At this point, anyone who's seen the 90s remake starring Lindsay Lohan has probably realized that this is almost identical to how it plays out in that version. And yeah, that's how the whole film feels. It's been a long time since I've seen the 90s version, but some of the lines are identical, I'm sure of it. Here are some examples.
Is that my little girl? That tall, gangly thing?
Sure you'll help me. Right over a cliff you'll help me.
It's super weird, isn't it? Anyways, they each want to meet the other's parents, so they decide to switch places to spend time with the parents they've never met. It's a very nice concept and reminds me of that folktale, The Prince and the Pauper. I'd like to take a moment to appreciate the practical effects used in this film. Obviously, they didn't have two Hayley Mills, so they took two different shots of her on different sides of the screen and spliced them together. It's a very interesting way of going about this concept, and results in the twins never being too close to each other whenever they're both shown on screen. Hayley Mills herself is a very good actress, although I'm not sure what the deal is with her accent. It's weirdly hovering between British and Californian. It's like she took the two separate accents the twins should have, combined them together, and gave them to both twins. It makes it a bit confusing at times to figure out who's who, which is probably the point, but I don't know. So they finally meet their parents, and we get the worst cut I've ever seen due to the whole disc flipping thing. It's terrible. Look at it. I mean, there's no fade out or anything. It's bad. Anyways, the majority of side 2 is different people slowly figuring out that the twins have switched places. See, their goal is to get their parents back together so they can be a whole family. The problem is, the father got engaged while they were at camp. This is Vicky, an obvious gold digger that has the father right in her trap. It's a parent trap, if you will. Well, not really, but I don't know. I have 13 more movies to get through today. Give me a break. I think it's interesting that Vicky's still the irrationally evil woman in this version. That feels like something to create for the remake, just for the made-up conflict. But she's still a great villain in this version. But the lady in the remake is legendary. So the mother finds out they've switched places, but the father doesn't. The mother wants to travel to where the father is to try and win him back, so they all end up at Dad's house, and their parents have a bit of an argument, which feels like a soap opera from the 60s. And with a much better cut than we got on side 1, we end up on side 3. There's quite a lot of tension between the mother and Vicky that I really like. You can really feel it, you know? There's also this Reverend character that's just kinda here. He's kinda cool since he just sits in the background enjoying the chaos unfolding in front of him. He is a bit creepy at times, though. I like how they've set up the parents in this movie. The mother clearly still loves the father, but he's trying his best to just move on with his life. It creates a lot of internal conflict that makes the final payoff that much more satisfying. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The twins set up this recreation of their first date, complete with... recreation? The twins set up this recreation of their first date, complete with a song. Let's Get Together is the main song of this movie, and it's pretty good. Hayley Mills isn't the best singer, but the song is still fun, and has a late 50s rock and roll feel that I can totally get behind. We're nearing the end of the movie now, and as one final attempt to get rid of Vicky forever, the twins set up a camping trip with just them, their dad, and Vicky. This is easily the best part of the movie, in both this version and the remake. They just torment Vicky throughout the whole thing, and it's just a joy to watch. Although, I'm starting to notice that some of the shots are way grainier than others for some reason. I'm not sure why exactly. It's probably some sort of side effect from a green screen or the film mastering being in a primitive state or whatever.
So Vicky storms off after the disaster of a trip never to be seen again. The parents reunite with a very romantic, very well done dinner scene, and then we reach the ending. And what an ending it is! As in, I have no idea what this is supposed to be. So, one of the twins wakes up in the middle of the night and tells the other one about this dream she had where their parents were getting married, and then the end title card.
What was that? Why was that how they ended the film? Like, it wasn't enough that they had to get married, they also had to make it a weird dream sequence or something? So far, these two films have had weird, out-of-nowhere endings, and I really don't know why. But that's The Parent Trap. Overall, I like the remake better, but this version still stands pretty tall on its own. It didn't really have that Disney magic that I feel like was more common with some of the more famous films from this era of Disney, such as Mary Poppins, but it was still an enjoyable film to watch. Pete's Dragon's problem was that it came out in 1977 while trying to replicate the feeling of an early 60s musical, making the whole thing feel horrendously outdated since the musical genre was pretty much dead at this point. To put that into perspective, this film came out the same year as Star Wars. Whoops. But The Parent Trap came out in 1961 during the heyday of this era. So, while I didn't have as much fun watching the movie, it was still the better film. So, make of that what you will. But now we've gone through the first two films. We still haven't seen that absolute classic, amazing masterpiece of a Disney film yet. So far, the pillar of the home video market is held up by two mediocre and half-decent films. We still need that super strong film to keep that pillar from collapsing on itself. So let's see if the next film will accomplish that feat. No. There is no way that this is going to be a good movie. I have absolutely zero hopes for this film. I mean, The Black Hole? A space sci-fi film made by Disney in the 70s? I mean, we've already established that the 70s was not a good time for Disney financially, but this just hits all the marks that make a bad film. It came out in 1979, 2 years after Star Wars. I'm sure that's just a complete coincidence and not a failed attempt by Disney to try to make back the money they had been losing at the time by riding the success of the most wildly popular film at the time. Definitely not. But see, that's what I mean by having zero hopes for this movie. I think it was just an attempted cash grab to try to attract Star Wars fans to their studio. Then again, I could be wrong, but all the signs are pointing to that being the case. But hey, maybe I am wrong. Maybe this is an underrated classic in the Disney library. There's a surprising amount of those. I had zero hopes going into, The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, and that turned out to be a pretty good film. So hey, maybe the same can be said for this film. It's going to suck so much, isn't it? Thankfully, this isn't a 2-disc album anymore, since the film is only an hour and a half long. That is an absolute blessing at this point. So let's just try and speed through this film as fast as we can, and hopefully come out the other end at least a little untraumatized.
Well, first impressions are key, as we all know. Pete's Dragon didn't have a very good one, The Parent Trap had an amazing one, and The Black Hole had a terrible one. Okay, so when I got the disc off eBay, the first thing I did was test it out to make sure it worked, and it did. So the next day I turned it on to sit down and review it, and the player wouldn't recognize side 1. It recognized side 2, but not side 1. Obviously that's not going to work, but it's weird because side 1 was working just fine when I tested it the night before. So I decided I didn't have enough time for this nonsense and set it aside to deal with later. The next day, side 2 wasn't working either. That was a big problem because this stupid disc was not cheap. But then, on my 20th try, I got it working perfectly. I have no idea what the deal was, but oh my gosh, what a waste of time. Now that that's out of the way, we get some killer vector graphics to kick things off. I don't know if this is CGI or not, but it probably isn't, given this film was made in 1979. Anyways, the plot of the film is that we have this group of space explorers searching for intelligent life along with their robot partner, Vincent. I like the design for Vincent, although he can be a bit annoying at times. They come across a black hole and talk about how mysterious and highly dangerous they are. Then they see a ship parked right in front of it and just drive towards it, almost getting sucked into the black hole in the process. Come on, were these guys not listening to themselves? Their ship is damaged, so they dock in the bigger ship called the Cygnus? Who cares? I don't. For emergency repairs. Turns out this ship was part of a much older mission that was recalled. The only remaining crew member is this guy, Hans Reinhardt, who definitely isn't the villain and won't be revealed to be the villain by the end of the film. Definitely not. There's no way he's the villain. He has this army of robots controlling the ship, and wow, these are some non-mechanical looking robots. They're just humans in cloaks and helmets. Surprisingly low budget for a Disney film, but whatever, it was a rough time for them. Now, just like Star Wars, this film uses miniatures, but honestly, that's the only parallel to Star Wars I've seen so far. The climax gets more familiar, but we'll get there when we get there. Oh yeah, this lady has ESP and can talk to the robot with her mind. I don't know why, they never explain it, and it only comes up again one more time in the movie. Just thought I'd point that out. So Reinhardt reveals that he's curious about what's inside the black hole, and so has stayed in space for decades trying to figure out a way to safely get inside. Meanwhile, Vincent meets an older version of himself, as in the same make and model, named Bob. Bob's cool, and he reveals to Vincent the secrets going on inside this ship, and oh wait, that's the end of side 1. Yeah, there's really not much to this film, especially in the first half. The pacing's a little wonky since we really don't get that much on side 1 other than a boatload of exposition. Anyways, Bob reveals to Vincent that Reinhardt is crazy. He's turning the old crew members into robots, Dr. Robotnik style. Yeah, apparently they were supposed to look like humans wearing costumes. It was a stylistic choice. I retract my statement from a while ago. The main characters all find out about this, and then the head robot kills one of them. I mean, I think that's what happens. The camera goes all over the place, and I can barely tell what's happening. Yeah, I should probably mention how killing a character on screen isn't a common Disney thing. Like, at all. Well, that's because this was actually the first Disney film to be rated PG rather than just G. As such, we get on-screen deaths and a lot of hells and damns. So now it's time to escape the ship with all the robots in pursuit. And here's where we start to see a lot more Star Wars similarities with these blaster fights. But these robots do somehow shoot a lot worse than stormtroopers. One of the main characters, there's like five of them, and you don't need to know their names, launches their ship and purposefully crashes it into the Cygnus because, well, I don't know why. Why does it matter to them whether or not Reinhardt goes into the black hole? I guess maybe they want to save the roboticized people, or maybe I wasn't paying enough attention. But now the other characters can't escape through their ship, so they go and find some sort of escape pod. During all this, a meteorite field collides with the ship, and this just looks horrendously outdated, and now everything's red and black like the goddamn Virtual Boy. It looks ugly, and it makes the bad video quality look even worse. And then Bob dies. What the heck? Bob didn't need to die? Why'd they kill Bob? I'm actually very upset by this. Also, are they outside? Like, is this outside? Are they outside in outer space without any helmets? Man, I don't know anymore. So the main characters escape, Reinhardt gets crushed in the destruction of his ship and then sucked into the black hole. All's well that ends well. And then... oh boy. And then we get the most confusing ending I have ever seen in a film. And I've seen The Three Caballeros. That ending to that film is insane. But this film actually had like a plot or something. And yet it gives us such a confusing ending. So the escape pod gets sucked into the black hole anyway, and then it gets all trippy as they dive further into the black hole. Okay, movie, I'm with you so far. And then we end up in hell, where Reinhardt and his head robot look like they're about to kiss, and then this happens, and then we go through this weird hallway, and then the main characters are all smiling at this planet, and then the credits just start rolling. What the heck was that? Why the heck was that? Was Reinhardt sent to the afterlife? Were they all sent to the afterlife? And okay, I get that this is supposed to be one of those up for interpretation endings that was all the rage in the 70s, but you have to walk a fine line with those between too obvious and too cryptic. Otherwise, you leave the whole audience confused like I am right now. I don't know what's going on with these endings, but they either feel completely out of nowhere and forced, or so completely insane that they leave me confused and angry. Overall, The Black Hole was a very odd film. The ending blew the whole thing in my opinion, but it did actually have some merit. Now, that being said, it was still a boring plot-heavy film that didn't have nearly as much action as it should have with its sci-fi setting, but it doesn't make me shudder and fear every time I think of it. That's not really a compliment, though. I didn't like this movie. I can see how it could become a cult classic, but it just wasn't doing it for me whatsoever. I think I was expecting a movie that explored what the inside of a black hole was actually like, where they meet all these weird alien sci-fi things. But honestly, if that's what they thought the inside of a black hole was like, then maybe it's for the best that we didn't get that. But that makes 3 pretty meh movies in a row. I get that Disney was probably holding back the big guns until they could get a good idea of what the market was looking like at the time, but they could have at least thrown one of their masterpieces into the ring. It at least would have made me happy. But whatever. I guess if you throw enough garbage into a pile, it'll eventually become a stable enough pile to hold a pillar on top of it. I just hope that wasn't the case in this situation. Let's see what the next movie is. Okay, I'm actually kind of excited about this one. I've heard some pretty good things about The Love Bug. I've at least heard more about this film than I have The Black Hole. And unlike the other films we've seen so far, this one actually got a boatload of sequels, which to me says that this was a very successful movie. I don't know much about it. All I know is that it's got a sentient Volkswagen Beetle in it named Herbie, but that alone has my expectations raised through the roof. Also, we seem to have left the realm of 2-disc albums for now, and I am forever grateful for that. Let's hope it stays that way for a while. On the back, we can see that this was apparently the highest grossing film of 1969. That's completely false. It was the second highest grossing film of 1969, with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid being number 1. I don't know if this was a mistake on their part or not, but I have a sneaking suspicion Disney was trying to purposefully mislead people with this completely unimportant statement. Looking at the screenshots, we can see that George Banks from Mary Poppins is in this movie. And I don't just mean it's the same actor, I mean this guy looks exactly like George Banks from Mary Poppins, right down to the way he dresses. This is going to be a very strange movie, and I am all for it. Let's just hope it's as good as I think it's going to be. First impressions are great right off the bat, since this is easily the best looking disc so far. The other discs had something wrong with them, whether it was a terrible mastering or signs of future laser rot, but this disc is the first one that I haven't had to deal with any of that. So the film is about this race car driver nearing retirement named Jim Douglas. His car has crashed in a demolition derby, so he sets out to buy a new one. He ends up at this car dealership where he meets his future girlfriend and the dealership owner. This guy. Let me tell you, this guy. I have seen some likable characters in these films so far, but this guy is one of the best characters from this era of Disney, and one of the most underrated characters in the entire Disney library. Okay, I might be exaggerating a bit, but he's definitely up there. First of all, this is George Banks. He's literally just George Banks from Mary Poppins. It's as if Mr. Banks moved to California to become a European car salesman. His overall vibes are identical in the beginning, a pompous British gentleman who prides himself on the quality of his work. In this case, the quality and fanciness of his cars. He has this Volkswagen Beetle that he hates and agrees to give it to Jim on one of those wonderful payment plans that we all know and love. But it turns out that the Beetle is actually sentient and can drive by itself, open the doors by itself, all that stuff. It uses this to try to get Jim and this lady to start dating, with pretty disastrous results at the beginning. But then the Beetle, named Herbie, starts winning race after race for Jim and everything's going great. But George Banks is having absolutely none of it. He strikes a deal with Jim. There's a huge race coming up called the El Dorado that both Jim and George will be racing in. If Jim wins, he gets to keep the car, and all his payments are paid off. But if George wins, he gets to keep the car. The final race is easily the best part of the movie. It's the only scene out of all these movies so far that I'd actually recommend any Disney fan because it's a really funny scene. There's a lot of slapstick-style humor used, and it all works really well. Although, the whole Chinese camp thing is a bit odd.
That's something I should actually mention real quick. This movie is far from perfect, but the good parts do a great job at overshadowing the bad parts. But there are still some questionable scenes.
So, the night before the big race, Jim gets skeptical about using Herbie since it's an underpowered car compared to the competition, and this race is serious. Herbie overhears this and proceeds to drive over to the Golden Gate Bridge with the intention of jumping off of it. No, I am not kidding. This is a real scene.
Come on, baby, it's gonna be a beautiful day tomorrow.
We also get this rich guy who wants to buy Herbie off of Jim. He's not an overtly racist caricature of Chinese people or anything like that. I don't think anyone's going to be offended by seeing this, but it's still questionable, you know? Anyways, during the final race, we get to see some of the lowest gas prices I've ever seen. Holy crap. And then George Banks goes completely off the rails. It's so weird to see since I really only know him from Mary Poppins, but he has the best lines in the movie during this race, and it led to me laughing out loud on more than one occasion while watching this movie. And trust me, that's extremely rare to see in a movie as old as this.
You know something about champagne, sir?
Have a sure. If you tell me that the bubbles tickle your nose, I shall probably kill you.
Here it comes again, sir.
Have a sure. I'm not a cowardly man, but I am beginning to sense that that thing is out to get me.
Now, none of that, sir. We're not losing our nerve, are we?
Blast you, have a sure! How dare you patronize me? I am not losing my nerve! There are times like this when I really don't like myself very much.
But as you'd expect, Herbie wins the race, albeit barely and while cut in half. Yeah, I wasn't kidding about the slapstick humor. Jim and the girl that I forgot the name of get together, and George loses his company to the Chinese businessman from earlier.
And that's The Love Bug. This is easily the best movie so far, and will probably be one of the best releases of 1982. I really like how contemporary the whole thing feels compared to the other movies. I mean, yeah, The Parent Trap was technically set in the year it came out, but this movie fully embraces that. The main theme is unquestionably 60s, with this funky flute and guitar combo that I really like.
There are even hippies in this movie. That's really weird to see in a Disney film this old, and I'm all for it. The final race is one of my favorite scenes from this era of Disney, hands down. This is just a really enjoyable movie that I highly recommend every Disney fan give a try.
This film was the first one that made me glad that I actually started this project. If it wasn't for this, I never would have been introduced to this film. I would have had the early 2000s remakes starring Lindsay Lohan being the only Herbie media I'd ever consumed. A fate worse than death. Overall, this is a great, funny film with great, funny characters and only a couple questionable scenes. Pretty A tier, especially considering the era this film came out in. That awkward period between Disney's death and the slow resurgence in popularity before the boom that was The Little Mermaid. It's not common to find a pretty good film in that era, but here's one of them. Speaking of which, on to the next movie. I highly doubt it's going to top this one, but hopefully it's at least a half-decent film. My expectations have been raised. Oh no. I'm not excited for this film at all. My raised expectations from The Love Bug have absolutely plummeted. I get that this film was truly ahead of its time when it first came out, but there's just no way the whole thing's not going to be horrendously outdated now. I mean, a film focusing on computer animation that came out in 1982. That just doesn't bode well for the timelessness of this film, you know? I know that this film is seen as a cult classic nowadays, but according to Wikipedia, The Black Hole is also seen as a cult classic nowadays. That's not a good sign, although I have heard more about Tron than I have The Black Hole. Also, something I should mention before we actually watch the movie, where is Sorcerer Mickey? This is a Walt Disney film, it says so on the database, but the front of the sleeve gives absolutely no indication as to the company that made the film. Well, turns out he's hiding on the back of the sleeve now. If I had to guess why they did this, it was probably so that this felt like more of a special release. Tron came out in 1982, the exact same year that this LaserDisc came out, so they were probably making it stand out as some sort of special thing. But in the process, they've messed up the whole standardized packaging, and that's pretty annoying. I'm not expecting much from this film, I'm just hoping I like it at least a little. Let's give it a shot.
First off, I know this film is probably going to be super cheesy, but how cool is this? This is probably the coolest thing anyone could possibly do in 1982. Watching Tron on a laser video disc. It's like the future yesterday. So the film starts up without any opening credits. This was surprisingly jarring for me. Every other film before this one had some opening credits, even The Black Hole, and that came out after the opening credits phase had ended for films. I guess that goes to show how far behind that movie was. The exact opposite can be said for this movie, though. The computer animation is actually pretty cool. This was my biggest concern going into this movie, and I'm glad to see that the computer animation, while it isn't groundbreaking stuff nowadays, creates one of the most unique 80s aesthetics I've ever seen. It's honestly really cool, and I strangely doubt I'd get the same experience watching the HD remaster on Disney+. But the green screen? Well, it needs a bit more work. Unfortunately, there is a big issue we see in this release. Remember back in Pete's Dragon where I talked about pan and scan, where they cut off the sides of the movie to fit on old TVs? Well, that's used on this disc as always. The problem is, this film was obviously designed for widescreen. There's parts where there's important looking things you can just barely see on the side of the screen, or people talking to someone that isn't in frame at all. Sometimes they tried to fix it in post by jarringly moving the camera in a super unnatural way so that everything in one shot gets captured. It doesn't happen that often, but it's surprisingly noticeable. Anyways, this film is about this company called Encom, where the software developers are trying to hack into the company's system and retrieve evidence that the games Flynn made, played by Jeff Bridges, were stolen by the villain of the film, who received all the credit for them and used that to rise to the senior executive position. I like the villain in this movie. His name's Ed Dillinger, and he's got that cold, generic, power-hungry businessman thing going on, but that's not the reason I like him. See, he's created a program that is becoming much smarter at an alarming rate, to the point where it steals random programs across the internet to add more information onto itself. Dillinger is totally aware of all of this, so it's interesting to see how he's genuinely scared of the program he made and knows how much it's truly capable of. This program sees what Flynn's trying to do, and so uses this laser thing the company had been working on to send him into the digital computer world, and here's where things get interesting. We get a lot more cool computer animation, which gives off some cool vaporwave vibes that I can totally get behind. So Flynn teams up with these other two programs he meets, RAM and Tron, to work together and try to take down the Master Control Program, or MCP for short. This is where we start to see the more iconic scenes from this film, especially this light cycle game they play. If I recall correctly, the arcade game that came out at the same time was this light cycle game, which in turn is based off this Atari 2600 launch title called Surround, which is basically a multiplayer version of Snake. It can be a bit hard at times to tell the three characters apart. Everyone gets this blue tint, and for some reason that makes them all blend together in my mind. But they make this easier on me by having Ram die, thanks to the MCP's right-hand man, Sark. Thanks, Sark. So Tron and Flynn have set off to take down the MCP by first going to this command tower and figuring out how they can stop him from there. Along the way, they meet this lady, Yori, who joins them for the rest of the mission. So Tron finds out how to kill the MCP thanks to this old guy with a weird hat, and they hijack this ship to go stop the MCP. And here's where we get our first good look at the thing itself. Jesus Christ, this is probably the worst looking thing in this movie. They stop the MCP, allowing them to access the evidence they need. It gets published, Dillinger gets fired, and Flynn becomes CEO of NCOM. Everyone lives happily ever after without any out-of-nowhere weird endings or anything like that. We even get a complimentary Journey song during the credits, which is really weird given the films I've been watching so far. This is a bit of a jarring change. And with the super old MPAA rating screen, the disc comes to a stop. I had zero hopes going into this movie. The black hole kind of left a bad taste in my mouth, and I wasn't too excited to jump right back into a sci-fi film right after it, but I was pleasantly surprised. I actually enjoyed this movie. The computer animation was super cool to see and was absolutely groundbreaking for the time. Actually, according to Wikipedia, this film was so groundbreaking that computers couldn't even do legitimate animation at the time. So they had to capture individual rendered frames of animation using a camera pointed directly at the screen. That must have been an absolute nightmare. But it was all worth it in my opinion. This film did pretty good in the box office, which is great for Disney given the rut they were in at the time. It also gained a cult following over time, and for good reason. This film surprisingly holds up after all these years, even with the outdated computer animation. That being said, the plot could be a bit confusing at times, and not all the practical effects hold up very well. Like, I have no idea what's happening here. But the overall aesthetic, synthesized music, and enjoyable characters definitely help make this film a joy to watch. I'm really glad I like this movie, and I highly recommend giving it a try. But it's time we go back to the past again and see what oldies Walt Disney Home Video has in store for us on this little, mildly torturing adventure. Hit me with your best shot, Disney. I am ready and waiting. It was fun getting that look at what Disney was releasing in theaters while all this was going on, but it's time for us to be thrown back in the past where they think we belong and have this movie shoved on our plates. We're the hungry children, and Disney is the gourmet cook who doesn't want to waste their best work on a child. Okay, that part was really weird. Note to self, cut this out of the video. Anyways, it looks like we've got our first spooky film of the marathon. Well, as spooky as you can get with Disney. I only think it's spooky because it's got witch in the title, and there's these spooky dogs, and the spooky tree. This film's not going to be spooky at all, is it? Looking on the back, we can see that this film was released in 1975. Now, that doesn't sound too far off from when these discs were releasing, but to put that into perspective, the time difference between when this film hit theaters and when it came out on video disc is the same as if Disney decided now was the perfect time to release Inside Out on DVD. I don't have that high of expectations for this movie, but that's mainly because I have no idea what to expect. I do know that this film got a couple sequels, one of which has Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in it, so it can't be all that bad or else Disney would just forget it ever existed. Right? Well, there's only one way to find out. First impressions are pretty bad once again. I don't know if this is a byproduct of laser rot, but I'm pretty sure this is just a result of a terrible film mastering on their part. You know how with some modern action films you have the problem where the talking parts are too quiet, but the action scenes are too loud? Well, that's what we got going on with this disc, except it's exponentially worse. Any talking is extremely quiet, and any loud noise whatsoever, whether it be a car horn or even a cat meow, is enough to blow up my poor speakers. It's to the point where if I want to actually watch the movie, I have to hold the stereo remote the whole time so I can change the volume a whole bunch, and that's not fun at all. Anyways, the film stars these orphan siblings, Tony and Tia. They have no memory of who their real parents are, except for these extremely vague flashbacks Tia has from time to time. These flashbacks are actually kind of spooky, but they're the spookiest part of this movie. Anyways, these two kids possess strange psychic abilities. Tony can move things with his mind using his harmonica. It's kind of a precursor to Matilda in a way, and the practical effects they use for Tony's powers are actually extremely reminiscent of Matilda, which is really cool because I really like both the movie and the book. If Tony's powers are reminiscent of Matilda, Tia's powers are definitely reminiscent of The Shining, as she can communicate to other people and even animals with her mind. It's interesting that these powers are so similar to those two properties, as this film predates Stephen King's book by 2 years and Roald Dahl's book by 13 years. I wonder if this is where they both got inspiration for their works. I'd also like to mention that this orphanage is really nice. I'm glad it didn't go for the generic movie plot of the orphanage being an abysmal, depressing place ruled by a vicious, evil woman. That cliche is annoying at this point. The orphanage goes to see a movie, which is, of course, Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, which, of course, had a theatrical re-release in real life the same year this movie came out. It's there that Tony and Tia come across this guy, Duranian, who works for a very rich man named Mr. Bolt. Duranian finds out about the kid's psychic powers and, seeing the potential that carries, decides to adopt them so Mr. Bolt can use them to his advantage. Stuff like finding oil underground by standing in a field miles above it and predicting future natural disasters, both of which they're able to do, mind you. It's kind of a reverse Annie situation. They get adopted from their very nice, welcoming orphanage and live with a rich bald guy who's completely evil and power hungry. Except in this case, the rich guy doesn't have a change of heart. So Tony and Tia manage to escape the mansion. Tia uses her telepathy on the guard dogs to have them chase the security guards instead. It's actually kinda cool. Tony and Tia run away with Bolt and Duranian on their trail. The kids have this old map that they think will lead them to their real home. They team up with this old guy in a camper who's reluctant at first but agrees to take them to a place on the map called Stony Creek after seeing their powers. I really like the main characters in this movie. It's always a bit of a gamble when child actors are the main characters. In this case, both Tony and Tia do a great job as the main characters. They're not as good as Haley Mills in The Parent Trap, but they're better than Pete and Pete's Dragon. The old guy's pretty cool too. He has a well-paced change of heart about the kids. Well, as well-paced as you can get with an hour-and-a-half long movie, but the whole thing never feels particularly rushed. I'd also like to point out that I don't know why, but a lot of the beaches we see with their terrain, and especially this bridge, just makes me feel like this was filmed on the Oregon coast. Like, isn't this a bridge in southern Oregon? That'd be cool if it was filmed here, but I can't find any info about where this part of the movie was filmed. Once again, we see some ridiculously cheap gas prices. I know this isn't adjusted for inflation, but seriously, $10 to fill up the tank of a camper? That's insane. They end up in a city called Longview, which is a real city in southern Washington, further proving my point that this was probably filmed in parts of Oregon. The sheriff of the town is told about the kids by Mr. Bolt and is offered a reward for capturing them. After a failed attempt, he sees them use their powers in an epic battle with a coat and broom and gets the townspeople hunting for them, claiming them to be witches from the nearby Witch Mountain. It's honestly kind of scary how little convincing it takes for the townspeople to hunt down 2 children with rifles, but hey, it is rural Washington. So now, with Mr. Bolt and the residents of Longview on their tail, the 3 protagonists make their way up to Stony Creek. At this point, Tia and Tony remember what happened to them. Turns out, they're aliens, whose ship had crashed in the ocean on its way to Earth. This is proven to be true when a mysterious voice telepathically communicates with Tia and Tony, giving them advice on what to do next. This results in the mysterious person using their powers to make the camper fly over the cars. This looks bad. I'm not afraid to say it. This just looks bad. I mean, well, look at it. But whatever. They make it to Witch Mountain, the mysterious voice reveals himself to be Tony and Tia's uncle, and they fly away in a spaceship that looks straight out of a low-budget horror movie from the 1960s. And that's Escape to Witch Mountain. It was fine. I've definitely seen worse. Unfortunately, the whole big reveal about them being aliens was spoiled for me, because it says so on the back of the sleeve. Way to go, Disney. I get that less people would be inclined to watch this if they didn't know right off the bat that it was going to be an alien movie, but I mean, come on, they didn't even pose it as like a question or a possibility, they just made it a flat-out statement. I enjoyed the movie though. The pacing was pretty good, the characters were likable, and the practical effects were impressive, for the most part. It's just that the whole sound issue made the experience less than fun for me. I don't entirely recommend this film, but I don't entirely want you to stay away from it, you know? It's a very average film that's completely harmless and may even be a bit thrilling at times. But we're all done with that. Can you believe we've only gone through 6 movies so far? That's it. 6. We still have 9 more movies to go in this video. And after that, another 17 years worth of movies to get through. Oh my god, I'm never making it out here alive, am I? Now this is more like it. I was wondering when Disney was going to release one of their many animated films on LaserDisc, and while this isn't quite what I was expecting, I will gladly take it. It's nice that right after the spooky-ish movie we got with Escape to Witch Mountain, we then move on to the next season with a Christmas movie. It's also very relevant for me, as when I wrote this part of the script, it was November 14th. But now when I'm filming this, it's February 9th, so a little late for Christmas stuff, but at this point, I don't care. Looking at the sleeve, we can see that this was going to be a compilation of sorts, with different scenes from different animated films. It gives examples like Bambi, Cinderella, and Peter Pan. It's really weird though, because it would take years before some of these films would be released on LaserDisc. We were 7 years away from Bambi's first release, 6 years away from Cinderella, and 8 years away from Peter Pan's release. That's really weird and makes this film feel like more of a preview of coming attractions than anything else. It's also our first disc that's only one-sided. Thank God this thing is only 47 minutes long. So we're going to be able to get through this thing really quickly. So join me as we celebrate the holiday season way too early. First off, they've made a couple changes to the opening logos, which is cool because they've been the exact same for all the other discs until now. We get the newer red FBI warning screen I mentioned way back with Pete's Dragon, and a newer updated Walt Disney Home Video logo that actually calls the company Walt Disney Home Video. So the film actually begins and we get a song, a Christmas song that's just okay, but that's not what I'm worried about. Where's the animation? This is just live action. I was hoping to see some animation in this movie. This whole opening feels like an ad for Walt Disney merchandise. It starts out at Disneyland, shows all the characters in their costumes and a bunch of Disney stuff. This doesn't bode well. Thankfully, after 3 minutes, we finally get some animation. This is the first fully animated thing we've gotten on LaserDisc. And no, Pete's Dragon doesn't count, that was a hybrid animation live-action film. So, what do they show first? What is the first fully animated Disney movie to appear on LaserDisc? Well, it's this short film called Once Upon a Wintertime, which was a part of a 1949 package release from Disney called Melody Time. Surprisingly enough, I've actually seen Melody Time, so I've seen this short film. It's pretty good. It's got this art style that I like, although the weird snake-like horses kind of freak me out. The short is about this couple going on a date at an ice skating rink. The ice breaks apart, so this guy has to save this girl before she floats over a waterfall. It's a very well-made short with some calming, winter-esque music and some pretty good use of colors to express emotion. This is a pretty good start to the program. After that's done, we get another segue into the next short. I am not a fan of these little songs they use for the segues. They're pretty bland and don't really add much to what we're watching. Like, yeah, it's Mickey, Donald, Pluto, and Chippendale. Although that's kind of a stretch because Donald Duck is barely in this short. The short is called Pluto's Christmas Tree. Mickey sets up a tree in his home without realizing Chip and Dale are living in it. Pluto finds out and hijinks ensue. It's a fine enough short. It's nothing too crazy, but it's definitely Christmassy, you know? And now we finally get our first look at a full-length animated feature film from Disney, that being the ice skating scene from Bambi. It's a great scene, one of the most iconic from Bambi, besides, well, you know. But there's something that's weird about this part. The song that comes before the scene starts claims that this scene takes place on Christmas Day. Can I see the source you found that proves this? I mean, I guess it could have happened on Christmas Day, but why does that even matter? The other two didn't take place on Christmas, they just took place during the winter, you know? But even worse than that is the movie that comes next. It's the You Can Fly song from Peter Pan when they're all flying to Neverland. Already, this doesn't really have much to do with Christmas. I get that one of the lines in the song is, think of Christmas, think of snow, think of sleigh bells, off you go, like reindeer in the sky, but that's really all that's Christmassy about this part. But the song that comes before this? Well, take a listen.
Fantasy in Never Never Land. Oh, what would Christmas be without Peter Pan?
What do you mean? What would Christmas be with Peter Pan? Is Peter Pan a Christmas film and I just never realized it? God, these segue songs are so stupid. After Peter Pan, we get a Donald Duck short. It's pretty good, classic slapstick humor you could expect from Donald Duck, where he works in a toy gift wrapping department. Not bad. It at least is focused primarily on Christmas this time. And now we get the end of The Sword and the Stone, with no cuts or anything. It starts when Art becomes the squire and ends when he pulls the sword out of the stone. This one I can kind of get. It's snowy outside. But the thing is, this jousting competition, the main part of this scene, takes place on New Year's Day according to the movie. I feel like on New Year's Day, most people are out of the Christmas spirit, you know? I also don't really think of The Sword and the Stone as a Christmas movie.
But it is a good movie, and anyone who says otherwise is wrong. But that's another topic for another video. Just know that come 1986, I'll have a lot to say about this movie, and it won't be anything bad.
Anyways, the next scene is Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo from Cinderella. Okay, this is getting ridiculous. Not only does this not have anything to do with Christmas, but they brought in this terrible Verna Felton sound-alike to add some completely unnecessary voice lines for the fairy godmother. Just take a listen.
Merry Christmas, Cinderella.
Why does she say Merry Christmas, Cinderella? It isn't even Christmas in the movie. God, this program is amazing. We end things off with a boring Night Before Christmas silly symphony, where it's just Santa and the toy sitting up a tree in this house for a long time. I guess the family didn't have a tree set up for Christmas, even though it's Christmas Eve. Also, there's this moon that is more terrifying than anything in any of these movies so far. But that's the end of the short films. We get one last song with a bunch of random Disney toys freaking the heck out. Then we get the credits from, I think, The Wonderful World of Disney. That's really weird to see on a LaserDisc. Wait, this was a TV Christmas special that aired on CBS. This was made to air on TV. It wasn't just a quick low-budget thing they made for home video to try and get people buying their LaserDiscs and videotapes. It was just a quick low-budget thing they made for television and home video.
Overall, this is a very weird Christmas special. Out of the 8 segments in it, only 6 of them were directly related to Christmas or winter. Now, that might sound like a vast majority, but I would think that a Christmas special would want all of their segments to be about Christmas. And I don't know whether or not the fact that this aired on CBS in early December of 1982 makes this special better or worse. The weird thing is, this hasn't been released on home video or digitally since its second home video release in the early 90s on both VHS and LaserDisc. I guess that means I'll be looking at this special again. Maybe I'll like it more then. Honestly though, this was great. I loved seeing clips from actual great animated films, having been stuck with all those mediocre live-action films for so long. I also really like how early all these film masterings are. There's nothing wrong with them, but you get all these film reel scratches and grainy audio that definitely would not fly by Disney's digitally remastering standards today. Very vintage. It was fun while it lasted, but just like Christmas, it can't last forever. I'm sure the next film is going to be another mediocre or half-decent 60s to 70s live-action Disney film. So let's try to blast through whatever comes next. I don't believe it. A full-length, animated, theatrical release, good Disney movie. I thought the day would never come. I guess releasing that Disney Christmas gift thing inspired them to actually release a full animated film to see how things would turn out. And I'm so grateful for that decision. I've been waiting for this moment since Pete's Dragon. That being said, it is Dumbo. Dumbo isn't exactly the best all-time animated Disney movie, but at this point I'll settle for anything animated. Animation is what Disney excels at, in my opinion, much more than their early live-action stuff. For the first time in this video, I actually know what to expect from the movie. I mean, it's Dumbo. I've seen Dumbo. It's pretty good. Far from perfect, though. So let's enjoy our very short time with this very short movie.
So, one of the first things we see when the movie starts is this creepy clown. This is terrifying, and I'm not even afraid of clowns. It's also worth mentioning that this movie is the first we've seen that's presented in its original theatrical aspect ratio. To be fair, all the other films were originally in widescreen, but this one wasn't because it predates the very idea of widescreen movies, but whatever. The movie starts with the storks delivering babies to the animals of this circus. Is this movie where the idea of storks delivering babies came from? I'm honestly not sure. That'd be pretty cool if it was. All the animals get babies except one, this elephant named Mrs. Jumbo. As far as I can tell, she's the only elephant in this movie that anyone refers to by name. The others are conveniently color-coded by costume, though. I'm pretty sure this purple one is voiced by the lady who played the Queen of Hearts in Alice in Wonderland, so that's pretty cool.
Out of my way, assassin!
I really like the art style used for this movie, especially when it comes to the character designs. It feels like a mixture of the realism we see in other films from this era and the cartoonish look we'd get from a Silly Symphony cartoon. That's basically all this film is, an extended Silly Symphony cartoon. It's pretty strange and a very large departure from the quality realism the other films from this period possessed. Like, in this one, the circus train is legitimately alive. His name is Casey Jr., and he has a super catchy song while driving to the next location for the circus. On the way there, Mrs. Jumbo finally gets her baby delivered by this stork, played by Sterling Holloway, the original voice of Winnie the Pooh. I believe out of all the characters we've seen so far, this is our first character who's legitimately anthropomorphic.
You know, a character who's obviously an animal but possesses distinct humanoid characteristics. Like, the stork is obviously a stork, but he walks and talks like a human and uses his wings like a human uses his hands. I don't think that's happened yet with a character as prominent as this.
But oh no, Mrs. Jumbo's baby has super big ears, and all the elephants hate him for it. They start calling him Dumbo, and that just sort of becomes his actual name somehow. Honestly though, baby Dumbo is pretty cute. They did a pretty good job making him a very likable character, and these super wide grins he does are adorable. They remind me of Pinocchio for some reason. Anyways, they make it to the next city and start setting up the tent. This is where we get probably the worst song in the whole movie. Not because it has a terrible tone or isn't catchy, but because it's literally a song about black slaves setting up the tent. Like, some of these lyrics are genuinely terrible. Look at this. I can't believe this movie is presented in its entirety on Disney Plus when it has stuff like this in it. Anyways, we get this scene where Mrs. Jumbo gives Dumbo a bath. This scene is great. You really feel the special bond the two characters have with each other. It makes it all the more emotional when they get separated immediately afterwards. Yeah, the pacing is a bit wonky at times. It makes sense since this is a very short movie, clocking in at just over an hour long. This movie has that sort of problem where the major story-driving scenes fly by, but they stick around for 5 to 10 minutes on pointless fluff. To be fair, sometimes the fluff is good, but sometimes it's the worker song I was just talking about. This is when Dumbo meets Timothy Q. Mouse, a smartly dressed mouse who becomes Dumbo's buddy for the rest of the movie. This guy is fully anthropomorphic.
I mean, mice don't walk like that. Humans do, though. He's even got a little hat and everything. He's basically a mini human in mouse form. This whole anthropomorphic thing would become much more commonplace as the decades went on. This experimental humanoid animal stuff would eventually lead to this, then this, then this. Well, maybe not that last one, but this is another topic for another time. Let's get back to the movie.
So the mouse gives the ringleader an idea in his sleep which would hopefully make Dumbo a super famous part of the circus. This idea involves all the elephants making themselves into a giant pyramid, with Dumbo reaching the top of the pyramid by jumping off a very tiny springboard. Like, how is this even supposed to work at all? Obviously it doesn't work, chaos ensues, and all the elephants blame Dumbo for it. Dumbo then becomes a clown, which is apparently super shameful for all the other elephants. I don't get that. The 1940s were like the peak decade for slapstick comedy. The clown bit was probably the best part of the show. Like, what would you rather watch? a bunch of smelly elephants walk around in a circle, or a completely chaotic Three Stooges performance with, like, a lot more Stooges. You know what I mean? Timothy takes Dumbo to see his mother for the first time in a while, and this is a surprisingly heartfelt scene. The song that plays, Baby Mine, is super mellow, and the whole thing is so sweet. Disney did a great job with this scene. Surprisingly enough, we're only like 15 minutes away from the end of the movie. This is when we finally get what is probably the most iconic scene from the film. Dumbo and Timothy drink water out of this bucket, not knowing that a whole lot of alcohol is accidentally spilled in there, so they get drunk and hallucinate these giant pink elephants. This is some of the best useless fluff Disney has ever made. It feels like if you took the most abstract Fantasia scene and combined it in a blender with elephants and the color pink and had artificial intelligence animate it. It's some of the most mesmerizingly insane stuff you will ever watch. It's genuinely shocking that this came from a full-length animated Disney film with a full story and everything. The song that plays during this part is extremely catchy too. But now it's time for the most controversial part of Dumbo, that being the crows. And honestly, they're not as bad as some people make them out to be. I mean, don't get me wrong, they are pretty bad. Most of the crows were voiced by African American actors, except for the main one, who was voiced by a white actor, and the crow's name is Jim Crow. No, I am not kidding. But in all honesty, everything else about them is fine. They sing a song which is super catchy, probably the best in the movie, and they don't necessarily say anything outwardly racist or anything like that, but that doesn't mean I'm going to ignore the whole Jim Crow situation they have going on. And no, changing his name to Dandy Crow in the 1950s doesn't change that much. Anyways, I noticed something actually interesting during this scene. At one point, Timothy blows his nose. Did that sound familiar? That's because it's the exact same noise the Grand Duke makes when he blows his nose in Cinderella.
Now, Your Majesty.
I hate that I recognize that, but it makes sense that early Disney would probably just have a whole stock sound effect archive to pull from. So Dumbo finds out he can fly with like 5 minutes left of the film. He flies during the last performance, and we get this weird montage that is extremely dated thanks to these stupid dumb bombers. The other elephants join in on the final song, and this also sounds super dated. Like, these ladies sound like the Andrews sisters. And we get one last look at the creepy clown from the beginning of the movie.
And that's Dumbo. Overall, this movie does have quite a few problems. The pacing is all over the place, and it focuses way too much on scenes that really don't add anything to the story. But that's not to say these unnecessary scenes are bad. In fact, I'd say the movie shines with these scenes. Stuff like Casey Jr. and especially the pink elephant scene will stick in my mind forever. And you have to cut them some slack. This film came out on the brink of World War II, hence the whole dumb bomber thing. There was this whole animator strike thing going on. It was just a whole mess all around. It's pretty obvious that this was going to be a silly symphony, but Disney extended it to a feature film to try to earn the company more money during this hard time. So, looking at it through that light, it could have been a lot worse. It's just that the outdated scenes are horrendously outdated. Looking at the back of the sleeve, Disney was marketing this film as a timeless classic, but I think that is far from the truth. The crows are pretty bad, but tolerable. But this worker scene, there's no excuse for this, and the best way to fix this scene would probably be to just cut it from the film altogether. Like I said, I'm astonished this scene made it into the Disney Plus version. Overall though, this was a fun movie. As the first full-length animated film I've looked at in this video, this was such a joy for me to watch, having been stuck with that live-action mediocrity nonsense this whole time. I will gladly take a decent animated film over that any day. But this was almost certainly a one-time thing. I guarantee you that the next film is going to be another mediocre live-action film. It was fun having this little break, but it's time to go back to, well, whatever we have next. It's probably not going to be as good as Dumbo, though. Yes! Another animated film! This is a pleasant surprise. I'm excited for this one for a lot of reasons. Firstly, It's Winnie the Pooh. Secondly, this is one of very few Disney animated films I've only seen once, and that was a long time ago, so I barely remember anything from it. The only scene I do remember from this movie is the Little Black Rain Cloud song, but that's just because it was included on this Disney Sing-Along Songs DVD I had when I was a kid. Gosh, we're gonna have to look at those at some point too. Weird. Anyways, let's see how good this movie is. Although, truth be told, I feel like this is going to be targeted for more of a younger demographic. It could still be a decent film, though. Let's give it a try.
So, this is new. We get an animated film with the live-action opening credits scene. That's pretty cool. Looking at the credits, we see that Don Bluth worked on the animation. I guess this was before he left the studio to go work on his own movies, one of which was an arcade game called Dragon's Lair. I mention this because Dragon's Lair used animated cutscenes via a LaserDisc player built into every arcade cabinet. Isn't that neat? Also, Timmy Turner is in this movie, I guess. But they decided to go with his formal name, being Timothy Turner. So we get this narrator who's going to be joining us throughout the whole story. Honestly though, I'm cool with that. He's a pretty good narrator, and having him along for the whole thing really helps make this movie feel like one of those interactive children's books. You know, stuff like Teddy Ruxpin or the one I had as a kid, TJ Berry Tales. Holy smokes, I haven't thought of that thing in years. Anyways, the narrator's cool because not only does he add to the charm of this clearly being targeted towards a younger audience, but also, like, every character directly interacts with both him and the book they're reading out of. It's weirdly meta and follows with a trend we'd see in comedy films from this era, such as Mel Brooks films, where the characters break the fourth wall every so often. Actually, the narrator in this movie is voiced by Sebastian Cabot, who voiced Bagheera in The Jungle Book. Weirdly enough, there's a surprising amount of veteran Disney actors in this movie, some of whom this would be one of their last roles before death. Sterling Holloway voices Winnie the Pooh, who we saw as the stork delivering Dumbo, and we'll see later on with the Cheshire Cat and Kaa the snake. Christopher Robin is voiced by Mowgli from The Jungle Book. Piglet is voiced by this old guy from The Emperor's New Groove of all people. Roo is voiced by the little kid elephant from The Jungle Book. Kanga is voiced by Lady from Lady and the Tramp and Merryweather from Sleeping Beauty. Tigger is voiced by the racist Siamese cat from the Aristocats. Rabbit's voiced by Archimedes from The Sword and the Stone. And Owl is voiced by Gyro Gearloose and Flintheart Glomgold from DuckTales. Jeez, that's a lot of legacy Disney actors for one movie. Now my hopes have gone up a little higher. Shockingly, this isn't even technically a full movie, but rather an anthology film. That's right, this movie consists of 3 short films and a compilation. Thankfully, they add in seamless transitions between the shorts, and the whole way the book is presented in a chapter form makes it so that I honestly had no idea that was the case until I did more research on the film. But first, we get the most iconic song from this movie, that being the main theme. This song is so darn catchy, I've known the whole thing for as long as I can remember. I'm sure you also know the song, so I'm not going to bother playing it. Definitely not because I'm already on thin ice with Disney. Having all these clips from their films in this video and playing one of their songs would result in this video getting taken down, effectively erasing literal months of work. Definitely not. So the first short focuses primarily on Winnie the Pooh for the beginning. I adore Winnie the Pooh as a character. He's just so stupid, and I love it. He's such a moron, but so innocently endearing. It's no wonder why he's the most profitable Disney character in terms of merchandise, more than even Mickey Mouse. So Winnie the Pooh runs out of honey. He goes searching for a beehive and develops a small plan to reach their honey. He takes one of Christopher Robin's balloons and covers himself up with mud as a disguise. This little interaction Pooh has with Christopher Robin is probably the funniest part of the film, just because of the matter-of-fact way Pooh delivers his line.
What are you supposed to be?
I'm a little black rain cloud, of course.
Unfortunately, the plan doesn't work. So Pooh is left without any honey and still rather hungry. So he goes to visit his friend Rabbit to eat lunch with him. Rabbit is a great character. I can relate to him. He hears that Pooh is coming over and has a mini panic attack over the very idea of having to eat lunch with him. Very relatable. But Pooh eats lunch with him anyway, resulting in him eating so much that he gets so fat he gets stuck in Rabbit's hole. No, get your mind out of the gutter. I mean his house's entrance, which is a hole. Pooh gets stuck in there for days, waiting to be thin enough to fit out of the hole again. By the time he can get out of the hole, Rabbit has basically gone completely insane. Again, very relatable. They pop him out of the hole, launching him into a honey tree where he's free to eat all the honey he wants. And by honey, the movie apparently means melted cheese. This is where we go to the second short of the film, being Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day. This short introduces us to two new characters, both of whom would become some of the most iconic characters from Winnie the Pooh. First, we meet Piglet, who lives in a house with an old sign out front saying "Trespassers Will." That's an odd touch, as the sign is definitely meant to say trespassers will be shot. Kinda dark, but whatever. Piglet gets blown away by the wind, Pooh grabs him by the scarf and flies him like a kite, messing up whatever Eeyore and Rabbit were doing. God, Eeyore is so depressed it makes me sad just thinking about it. The second character gets introduced about halfway through the short, being Tigger. I like Tigger as a character. He serves as a great contrast for Pooh in terms of personality. Pooh is mainly a mellow, easygoing character, whereas Tigger is completely energetic, very talkative, and literally bouncing off the walls every chance he gets. Tigger mentions these monsters called Heffalumps and Woozles to Pooh, saying how they love honey and will steal Pooh's. This leads to a clever nightmare sequence that isn't actually clever at all because we literally just watched this. This whole scene is basically a worse version of the pink elephant scene from Dumbo. In fact, it looks like some of the animation was traced over directly from Dumbo, like this part where all the movements are identical. This animation tracing thing was very common at this point. See, the movie came out in 1977, which we've already established wasn't a very good time for Disney financially. So they'd trace over animation in order to save money on drawing new frames. This trend is easiest to see in something like Robin Hood, but it was used as late as Beauty and the Beast, which is interesting. I'd also like to point out how all the songs in this film are super catchy, but in a way where I can remember the melody, but not the lyrics. It's hard to explain, and doesn't mean the songs are bad in any way, it's just that the lyrics aren't particularly memorable for most of these songs. Anyways, we're finally on to the last short, being Winnie the Pooh and Tigger 2. Tigger is messing up everyone's day, particularly Rabbit's. So Rabbit devises a plan with Pooh and Piglet to purposefully lose Tigger in the forest. Rabbit and Tigger have this relationship that really reminds me of SpongeBob's and Squidward's of all things, especially this scene where Rabbit is ice skating by himself, talking out loud about how it's a quiet, peaceful day without that annoying Tigger around. Then Tigger shows up out of nowhere, bringing chaos in his wake, ruining Rabbit's peaceful moment. You see what I mean? This short also gives us two internet memes, which I wasn't expecting at all. We get this tired Pooh shot when Rabbit's discussing the plan, and sad Tigger walking away when he returns from being lost on the one condition he can never bounce again. Obviously, this condition doesn't last, as everyone realizes they missed the old Tigger, even Rabbit. Tigger gets everyone bouncing, and they end the movie off with this supplemental ending that had never been seen prior, where Christopher Robin says goodbye to Pooh as it's time for him to head off for school. A very symbolic moment about leaving behind early childhood to take on adulthood, and a very touching scene that I really enjoyed. Although the live-action bear winking at the end is a very scary scene that I really hated.
And that's Winnie the Pooh. I feel like people who haven't seen this movie automatically assume it's meant for toddlers. And yeah, while it might be enjoyed by toddlers, there's still something in it for all ages, just like any other Disney film. I enjoyed the music, the stories were simplistic but fun, and overall the entire package was something I don't regret watching. This is a movie that I feel like any classic Disney fan will derive some enjoyment from. It truly does make you feel like a little kid again watching it. This feels a bit underrated in the Disney animated film library. But it's time once more to move on to the next film. We've gone through 2, technically 3, animated movies in a row, so let's see what the next animated movie is. Wow, this is a crazy looking animated film. It's so realistic you'd think it's live action. I think these films are starting to get to me. So, Davy Crockett and the River Pirates. What do you want me to say? I have no idea what this movie even is. Looking on the back of the sleeve, it's apparently a legendary movie about a legend. So I'd say we're in good hands. Also, there's apparently Indians in this movie. Not Native Americans, Indians. This bodes well. This movie came out in 1956, which was around the time that all this Davy Crockett stuff was the most popular. I've definitely seen this classic Davy Crockett hat on more than one kid in 1950s films. This looks terrible. Let's watch it.
The movie starts, and the first thing I see is some historic artwork in the background. Definitely gives me a good idea of how this movie's going to play out. The film is about Davy Crockett, king of the wild frontier, and his sidekick George, who's played by Buddy Ebsen. This guy was the original actor cast for the role of the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz, but had to be replaced after a near-death experience involving an allergic reaction to the aluminum paint they used for his face. It's cool to see that he continued acting after that, though. This is the absolute oldest live-action film we've taken a look at so far, and is one of the first Disney ever made. The quality of the film definitely highlights this fact, as film grain is all over this thing. Not to mention, we get something I've never seen before on a LaserDisc. The film cut to static for half a second. That's something I would have expected from a VHS tape or a Betamax, but I've never owned a disc where the film drops out like this. Let's hope it doesn't happen anymore. So Davy and George come across this guy, Mike Fink, the self-proclaimed king of the river. He challenges them to a riverboat race from Ohio to New Orleans. If Davy wins, he gets to claim the title of King of the River. I think. But if Mike wins, he gets all these sweet furs that Davy and George have collected during their hunting trip. So the race is on, and that's the entire movie for the next 45 minutes. We get the second worst green screen yet, second only to the park walk and the Parent Trap. At one point, they all work together to fight off the so-called engines. Yeah, this film hasn't aged too terribly well. Also, Mike Fink is having way too much fun shooting these guys. That's pretty dark. Something interesting I noticed is that the close-up shots of various animals look completely different from the rest of the film in terms of lighting and film quality. That makes me think this is leftover stock footage from the dozens of nature documentaries Disney released in the 50s for some reason. Really, nothing else happens for the rest of the race. Although Davy Crockett has won, the race has ended, and we haven't even reached side 2 yet. It feels like the movie is coming to a close. We get the classic Disney choir singing the Davy Crockett song in a way that only really means the movie's ending, doesn't it? Well, it's not. We flip to side 2 and we're on a completely different plot. What the heck happened? Well, it turns out this film is a compilation of 2 episodes from the mini-series that was out at the time. Kinda like what they did with The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, but without as smooth of a transition between them. Anyways, on side 2, Davy and George get kidnapped by a tribe of Redskin Indians. Their words, not mine. Turns out there's some funny business going on with some other tribe, and they're getting ready for a war because of it. Well, turns out this other tribe is that group of Native Americans that attacked them earlier, who are actually pirates dressed up as Native Americans to try and pin the blame on them instead. So Davy, George, and Mike all team up to lure the pirates out of their hideout and fight them to the death. This fight scene is surprisingly boring. Nothing much is really happening. It's just a bunch of dudes slapping each other in a river. Although Mike straight up kills people by bonking them on their heads with his fist, which is pretty funny. They fight off the pirates and win. That's where the movie ends.
Yeah, there really wasn't that much to this movie. Like, at all. I really don't know what else to say. This movie isn't really timeless in any sense of the word. It definitely feels like a byproduct of the whole cowboys versus Indians craze that took place in the 1950s. I personally have never been the biggest fan of movies like this that take place during pioneer times, but this one wasn't extremely boring all the way through. Which is more than I could say about Silverado, but I think I've brought up more than enough of my unpopular opinions for one video. But yeah, you're not missing out on anything by not watching this film. But if you do watch this, then you will have definitely watched a movie. That's basically all I can say about this film. It just didn't do much for me. I want more animated stuff, or at least movies I can talk about for more than 5 minutes. Come on, Disney, give me something great. Disney, this is not something great. This is going to be such a boring film, oh my god. I've already established how I'm not the biggest fan of Pioneer-era films. Well, according to the back of the sleeve for this film, it takes place in the Dakota Territory during the gripping presidential battle between Grover Cleveland and Benjamin Harrison. Doesn't that just sound exciting? Well, this film is a musical,
with the Sherman Brothers composing the songs. However, this film did not do good in the box office and was panned by critics when it came out. Now, that might sound like a major flaw in the quality of the film, but that doesn't really mean much for how the film is viewed today. That being said, I don't know how this film is viewed today, but I do know that Hello Dolly had a similar issue when that came out, and that's one of my all-time favorite musicals. And no, not just because some of the scenes in it were in WALL-E. Actually, it's extremely hard to view this film today. This film got a total of 3 releases in North America. It was released on VHS a year prior to this, and also got a limited DVD release in 2004. Other than that, it hasn't even been released on Disney+. No widescreen version of this film has surfaced as far as I know, making this film about as obscure as Song of the South, though not nearly as controversial. So I guess you could say I'm holding the one and only genuine original LaserDisc of the one and only genuine original Family Band. Okay, let's just watch this film before I go insane. So the film starts and we don't get any opening credits? That's odd, considering this is a Disney movie from 1968, but I'm fine with it. Immediately, we're forced into a song that the titular family band is singing all together. This is the Bauer family, and they're a pretty talented family band conducted by their grandfather. Interestingly enough, the father is once again played by Buddy Ebsen, who we saw as Davy Crockett's sidekick in the previous movie. It's weird that he's suddenly popping up in all this stuff after I had no idea he kept acting after the Wizard of Oz incident. This family does a pretty good job at the musical aspect. The opening song they sing is very well done, but I can't remember anything about it besides writing in my notes that it was a really good song. Well, that and the whole thing heavily reminded me of the Partridge Family. Seriously, why was this era so focused on family bands when it came to music? There were like 3 family bands in the 60s and 70s, which is way too many family bands. As for the family itself, well, most of them are very forgettable. I think there's a bit too many children in this family, and it makes it pretty difficult keeping track of who's who. Seriously, there's 8 children, all of whom have similar personalities, and it's just a lot of protagonists to keep track of. Thankfully, the film doesn't focus on all the family members. It mainly focuses on the grandfather, the parents, and this girl named Alice. She's excited to meet up with this boy she's been writing letters to for a long time named Joe Carter. She sings a song about him. It's a sweet romantic song and reminds me of The Sound of Music. That being said, I've actually never seen The Sound of Music, but seeing this girl dance and sing in this meadow filled with flowers just screams The Sound of Music to me. Alice is anxiously awaiting for the man of her dreams to arrive, and when he does... Holy smokes, this isn't good. This guy's like 50, and Alice is barely 18. Yikes. Okay, false alarm. This isn't actually Joe Carter. It's some dude who represents the Democratic National Committee, and is here to judge a campaign song the grandfather has written for the family band, which serves as a campaign to vote for Grover Cleveland in the upcoming presidential debate. Their campaign song is legitimately pretty catchy. Like, holy smokes, this is a very well-written song. Way better than what I was expecting. I guess I should have been expecting this quality from a song list composed by the Sherman Brothers, though. The guy loves their song, claiming it'll convince everyone to vote for the Democrat in the election. This is strangely political so far, but whatever. They're all so happy that they, naturally, sing another song. This one has a sort of jazzy feel to it, which is something that isn't new for musicals from this era, but I never get tired of it. Jazzy musical numbers in films like this, no matter how subtle the jazz tones are, help make the songs way better in my opinion. The choreography, though, it sucks. I don't like it whatsoever. It's just so... nothing, you know? This is where Joe Carter shows up, and he's a cool dude. He and Alice quickly hit it off and basically fall in love instantly, as is common in Disney films. But the grandfather disapproves because, guess what? Joe's a Republican who wants to separate the Dakota Territory into 2 states, adding 2 Republicans to the Senate. Oh, the horror! Yeah, this film focuses a bit heavily on American politics. I'm starting to see why this film hasn't resurfaced all that much. I mean, a Disney film where all the main characters are blatantly Democrats? Disney's been woke for years and we didn't even realize it! Anyways, the family decides to move to the Dakota Territory. I thought they were already living there, but I guess not. Actually, before they move, Joe sings a pretty good song about how great Dakota is. Fun fact, this song was considered to become the state song for South Dakota after the film came out. That's weird. So they get to Dakota, and already they have trouble blending in. These guys are Democrats, and Dakota is predominantly Republican. So their song about how great Cleveland is practically causes a riot. Alice is chosen to become the school teacher for the town's elementary school. Then we get a duet of a love song from Alice and Joe. Seriously, this is a great couple. I really like them. It's on to side 2 now, and Alice can't make it to school on her first day. So Joe sends the grandfather to tell the children school is closed. Instead, he decides to teach them himself, singing a song about the Civil War. This song is super boring though, and I don't like it. The word gets out around the town that the grandpa was teaching the school children what America should be like from the perspective of the Democrats, so the mayor accuses him of indoctrinating the children with leftist ideas through public school teaching. Holy smokes, this film was oddly topical. That was unexpected. Obviously, what he did was actually harmless, but the humiliation and frustration causes Alice to quit. Joe and Grandpa get in a fight, resulting in Alice and Joe getting in a fight, and they drift apart, with Alice going for a Democrat instead, named Ernie. This falling out scene flows pretty well with the rest of the story. However, I do think it was a bit out of nowhere for the grandpa to decide to teach the school himself. Like, he should know that's not a very good idea and won't go well with their parents, but whatever, it all gets resolved by the end anyway. Election night has arrived, and we get this West of the Wide Missouri song that's also super catchy and has the same type of chord progression for the chorus as Step in Time from Mary Poppins. They make it super intense, building up to the big reveal of who becomes president.
Well, I can tell you that I looked it up prior to watching the movie. It was Benjamin Harrison. We still had another 4 years before Cleveland became president again. Actually, the way it turned out was pretty interesting. Grover Cleveland got the majority vote, but Benjamin Harrison got the Electoral College vote, so he won anyways.
The stupid Electoral College makes no sense and should be abolished. I love how both sides end up fighting each other in a big riot after the election. I can definitely see why they wouldn't be too keen on re-releasing this film, but it's such an interesting representation of American politics that holds up today way more than it should. Anyways, before Cleveland leaves the office, he grants statehood to the Dakotas, Washington, and Montana, leveling out the senator gains for both parties. This satisfies everyone. They do a triumphant musical number. I find out that someone was terrible enough to think that a proper name for one of the family band kids would be Mayo, and the movie ends.
This was a very political film. Definitely not something you would expect from Disney. Although I don't think the film focused on the band as much as it should have, given they made an 8-word title just about the family band, but whatever. The way they portray each side as equally aggressive towards each other really does a good job at representing how downright warlike presidential elections can become, especially if you're viewing them from outside the country. It's kind of sad that this is still a relevant subject, given this was about Benjamin Harrison's election, which was 134 years ago. But the songs were catchy, the characters were likable, except for the grandfather. He got a bit too political at times for me, but everyone else was likable. The setting, while not my favorite, didn't make me fall asleep from boredom, so that's a plus. Overall, this might honestly be worth a watch, both because of its relative obscurity as a Disney film and its oddly relevant political message. But it's time to stop talking politics and move on to the next movie. After all, it's not too late for us to get some animated films, so let's see if that's what we get next. Alright, this works. Looks like we've got a compilation disc with a bunch of classic Disney cartoons on it. 12 to be exact. This might actually be an interesting watch. I've always enjoyed classic Disney cartoons, and I definitely haven't seen all of them, so it's nice to be able to watch a whole bunch of them back to back like this. Looking on the back, out of the 12 on here, I've only ever seen 2 of them. Society Dog Show and Through the Mirror. Through the Mirror is an absolute classic, and I don't remember a single thing from Society Dog Show, so this is actually going to be an interesting watch. The problem is, I can't imagine it'll be a very interesting review. We're not going to be getting complex storylines from any of these shorts. It's just going to be a bunch of fun slapstick humor revolving around a very basic plot. It's still going to be fun classic Disney humor though. So let's see what Disney has in store for us with this disc.
Well, this is unnerving. we have a weird title card. No music, no animation, just some bland-looking title cards. That makes this whole thing feel like one of those unaired TV pilots that resurfaces on Daily Motion or something years after the show is canceled. You know? Yeah, you know. So without any warning, we jump straight into the first short being Through the Mirror. We don't even get the original title cards for the shorts in this. That's really weird, and in my opinion, kinda messes with the flow of the shorts in general. But whatever, this is a classic Disney short, one of the first I think of when I hear the term Silly Symphony. Basically, Mickey falls asleep while reading Alice Through a Looking Glass and dreams that he enters a bizarro version of his house where his furniture is alive and he turns tiny and he dances with some gloves and talks to the phone and dances with some playing cards. But then the playing cards don't like him and they chase him, then he wakes up. Yeah, I don't know what you want me to say. It's a good short, I just don't have much to talk about since it's only like 8 minutes long. The animation is good, but is that really a surprise coming from a Walt Disney cartoon? The ending reminded me a lot of Alice in Wonderland, which is because that's what this short is based off of. I mean, technically it's based off the sequel, but whatever. The pacing is... I don't know, pacing isn't really a thing that has to be dealt with in a cartoon like this. These shorts aren't supposed to be looked at in that sense. They're supposed to serve as supplemental material for kids to laugh at when they get taken to the theater. This isn't going to be the most exciting review, I'm afraid. The next short is... Whoa, back it up. What the heck was that? Okay, so instead of doing what they should have done and including the title cards as an easily understandable cut between the shorts, they instead do this. They cut the shorts by a little bit on each end and fill in the blank with this segue. You've gotta be kidding me. These make the segues in a Disney Christmas gift look much, much better by comparison. I didn't care for those, but I'd much rather look at that than these Microsoft PowerPoint abominations. The next short sucks. It's called The Sleepwalker. Pluto has a bone. This dog wants the bone. Pluto doesn't want this dog to get the bone, but Pluto sleepwalks and gives the bone to her without realizing it. Pluto gets angry and decides to give her his doghouse and all of his bones after realizing that she's a mother of like 6 dogs who has no food. So give them a pile of bones to chew on. That'll fill them right up. This was just dumb. They could have easily condensed it into like a 30-second TV spot you'd find on Playhouse Disney to teach kids about sharing. Instead, they throw in this weird sleepwalking thing that really doesn't have much to do with the overarching story, even if it's literally the title of the short. This whole thing just felt pointless. I didn't like it. I've seen a couple Pluto shorts, and in my opinion, they're always the blander ones of the bunch. Thankfully, next we have a Donald Duck short. This one's funny. It's just Donald getting tortured by his 3 nephews, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, while just trying to enjoy a game of golf. This one was at least funny. And it's interesting to see such early designs of Donald's nephews. They all sound exactly like Donald and have stupidly similar outfits, unlike the contrasting colors we'd see them get in stuff like DuckTales. They also have identical personalities, which was also the case in DuckTales to be fair, but they did remedy that in the DuckTales reboot, which I really liked. The video game is really good too. The one on NES has some outstanding music and a very unique attack mechanic that takes just a little bit of time to get used to, but makes for some of the best 8-bit platforming ever created. DuckTales on NES really does feel like peak 80s platforming, just like how Sonic 3 and Knuckles feels like peak 90s platforming. Both have some classic tunes, and while they may not be as wildly popular as the Mario series, they do deserve the right to stand in the same spotlight as that series. If you haven't played DuckTales, I'd highly recommend giving it a try. They also remastered it for modern consoles, but I have yet to play that version. Anyways, Donald's golf game is a pretty good short. It's nothing too special, but that's not what these shorts were trying to be. So according to the back of the sleeve, next up should be Pluto and the Gopher. Except it isn't. It's the Whalers. What the heck, Disney? They put the shorts in the wrong order on the back of the sleeve. Mickey, Donald, and Goofy go on a whaling trip and hijinks ensue. That's all you need to know. Gosh darn it, another Pluto short? Ugh, this one's just a Tom and Jerry clone, which is common to see with Pluto shorts. In this one, he's chasing a gopher for a long time. The taunt the gopher makes sounds like those stupid egg thieves from Spyro the Dragon, all of which deserve to burn in hell. But this one deserves to be stepped on by Satan himself. Screw you, random egg thief from a late 90s PlayStation game. I hate you. And then Chip and Dale are there, and they fight this dragon, which is really an excavator trying to move their stump and replace it with the freeway. Remind me of the plot from Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but like only the ending when that plan is revealed. Hope I didn't spoil anything for you guys. Sorry if I did. Wait, credits? We're at the end of side 1. Why are there credits? We still have one more side to look at. Why are there credits? What? The end? What do you mean? There's still like 40 minutes of runtime left. Who made this? Why is there a credit for music when there is no music? Help! So side 2 begins and we get the creepy title cards again. Wait, collection 2? No. This is still collection 1. Why?
Okay, I cracked the code. This is a double feature of 2 VHS releases from the year prior. They took the first 2 collections on VHS and combined them together for the LaserDisc version, naming the whole thing Collection 1 without actually changing any of the title cards for the format transfer. That means that once we get to Collection 2, and yes, there is a Collection 2, we'll actually be looking at whatever the heck is on Collection 3 on VHS. This is the stupidest thing I've ever dealt with. And the worst part is, no matter how much I complain, none of you care.
So, Society Dog Show. Pluto gets entered into a dog show, but is super informal at the fancy schmancy show, so gets kicked out. Then everything catches on fire. Yeah, it's as out of nowhere as it sounds. Pluto saves this little dog he has a crush on and gets called a hero. Yeah, good for you, Pluto. Pluto's sweater. Minnie makes Pluto a sweater. He doesn't like it. His sweater shrinks. Now it's Figaro's sweater. This shot of Minnie wearing the sweater triggered my fight or flight response. Also, dog sweaters are bad. They're ugly, uncomfortable for the dogs, and should be outlawed. If it sounds like I'm not really giving it my all with this review, you're absolutely right, because there's not much to give. I actually got really bored at this point when we got to Donald's Apple Core. I think the problem is these shorts were designed to be watched one at a time in a theater. Not 12 at a time in my room, alone, desperately trying to reword on a Google Doc how each short was funny. Next up is The Little Whirlwind. That's it. That's actually all I wrote for this segment in my notes. I just wrote The Little Whirlwind is up next and then went to the next short. I think these movies are killing me. Oh my god, another Pluto short? God, I'm getting really bored. I actually just pulled out my phone and started scrolling through memes at this point while thinking about all the other stuff I could be watching instead of this, including B-Stars. And then when I looked up, this was happening. This is my life now. And then Donald's Diary, narrated by a British boy. Donald falls in love, until he doesn't. Weirdly enough, this short gave me weird 101 Dalmatians opening vibes because British and love. Why does this exist? Oh, it's over. Okay.
And that was... what was that? It was a collection of short films that managed to drain all the energy out of me. But if you want my final verdict on all 12 cartoons, then...
It was good. It was bad. It was good. It was good. It was bad. It was good. It was good. It was bad. It was bad. It was good. It was good. It was bad.
And that's my review of all of these shorts. Jesus Christ, we're too close to the end to quit now. I just have to power through whatever we have left and hopefully not collapse from exhaustion by the end of it. Please, Disney, for the love of God, give me something interesting. Anything. Oh my god. Okay, I knew that this existed. I at least knew that much. I thought that this was going to be released in 1983, so I wouldn't have to talk about it until the next video. But not only did this come out the same year, it was released alongside the first one? This is some Mega Man Legacy Collection nonsense. Why? Why? Let's just get this stupid thing over with. You know the drill. There's 12. 11. Wait, 11? Then why is this one longer than the first one? Oh my god, this video was a mistake.
On the off chance this actually does become popular, I might be singing a different tune. But in the much more likely event that this video gets like 12 views with one comment calling me gay, then yeah, this was a mistake. I don't want to watch this. Let's watch this. Okay. Let's set the stage real quick. Time for a quick replenishing of sanity. It's been a while since I watched that first short collection. I wanted to space these out because looking back at the script I wrote for that, holy smokes, I let my impulsive writing completely take over. I mean, I'm gonna leave it like that, it's kinda funny, but I can't do it more than once, you know? Anyways, it's been 4 days since I wrote that mess. It's now a cold, rainy, windy Tuesday, and I just got home from an early morning shift, and I'm ready to relax. I ate some Burger King for lunch, so I'm all good for the next 7 hours on food. I made myself some tea called English Afternoon. I'm not English, but it is the afternoon, so I get partial credit on that front. I cleaned up my room, started a load of laundry, turned on these cool atmospheric LED lights I got for Christmas, and sat down in a slightly comfy chair, ready to watch the disc. This is going to be relaxing, but not to the point where I'll get bored. This has been a quick replenishing of sanity. And now, back to our regularly scheduled video. The disc starts and we get something new. This weird, trippy, 70s kaleidoscope-looking title card. It's more visibly pleasing than the first one, but... On Vacation with Mickey Mouse and Friends? That's not what this is called. Is this the right disc? And then we get this little sequence with Jiminy Cricket. Already this is much different from what we saw before. Well, I figured it out. The two sides of this disc are two separate episodes of the Disneyland television series from the late 50s and early 60s. This one is aptly called On Vacation with Mickey Mouse and Friends. We've established that. The other side is called Kids is Kids. Interestingly enough, both of these sides got individual releases on a very early form of LaserDisc called DiscoVision. Wait a minute. Oh man, I forgot about the Disney titles on DiscoVision. There weren't a lot, but that's still pretty annoying. Well, whatever. Maybe I'll look at these in their own video once I'm done with this whole project. But that probably won't be until 2040, so I guess I'll see you all when I'm 36 when I talk about the DiscoVision titles. God, that's depressing. Anyways, not only are the segues between the shorts animated this time, but they actually create an overarching story in a way. Jiminy has been brought on as a producer for his very own short. So he tries to call Mickey and the gang to star in it, but they're all busy being, what else, on vacation. The first short is Canine Caddy. This one's fun. Mickey's golfing and Pluto's the caddy. Hijinks ensue involving this gopher, and that's pretty much it. Harmless, humorous fun, although the fact that Mickey would even consider hitting a golf ball off of Pluto's back is very scary. The transition to Bumblebee is so seamless I didn't even realize it had started until the bubblegum showed up. This is of much higher quality than the direct-to-video slop we got before. In Bumblebee, Pluto finds this bee who's been stashing gumballs in his beehive. Pluto breaks it and steals the gum, then they have a battle involving bubblegum. It's pretty clever, and the noises the bee makes are pretty adorable. Then we get a Goofy short. This is some great, even-paced variety so far. In this one, Goofy and his friend Wilbur go on a fishing trip. Wilbur's a grasshopper, so he's the bait. It seems really dangerous, and of course, Wilbur gets eaten. They have a surprisingly well-established friendship between the two, especially for a one-off character. You really feel for Goofy when he realizes his friend is gone. But of course, Wilbur isn't actually gone. He got eaten by a frog, which got eaten by a stork, causing Wilbur to hatch from this fully developed stork egg. Okay. Next up is Donald with this short that takes place at a dude ranch. Already not my favorite setting, but holy smokes, why isn't this short talked about more often? I don't even know if it's available anywhere besides here. The short's called Dude Duck, and I highly recommend it. The short begins with this horse playing horseshoes by flinging his own horseshoes off his hooves. It's great. And then these human girls show up. These designs are terrifying. It's like if you took a Don Bluth design and just removed all the details to make them look as unrealistically realistic as possible. Donald Duck shows up, and the horse is mad he's stuck with Donald, and Jesus Christ, Donald is not playing around. He shoots at the horse's legs to get it to stay still for him. That might be why this isn't readily available at the moment. And then the slapstick actually begins, and it's amazing. Some of this stuff feels more like a Looney Tunes short than a Disney one, and I'm absolutely loving every second of it. The slapstick is actually extremely funny. I highly recommend this one. Back to Jiminy, who's trying to get a hold of Donald, but can't, so he calls a bunch of people to try and find him. This is where things get super weird and kinda for like 30 seconds. It's really weird and comes completely out of nowhere. The short Jiminy was creating is a complete plagiarism of this short from 1938 called Mickey's Trailer. By that, I mean it's just the exact same short. It's a good short, though. Have you ever wanted to see Donald Duck take a bath? No? Well, too bad, here it is anyway. The way this single trailer room changes into all the other rooms you'd find in a house, it reminded me a lot of Mickey Mouse Clubhouse. Bet you weren't expecting that, were ya? And finally, we end things off with Hawaiian Holiday. This one's alright, not the funniest one on this disc, but definitely not bad at all. My favorite part is with Pluto. He gets this shell stuck on his tail like he's a slowpoke. Then this crab. This crab is awesome. The way he tries to pinch Pluto but can't quite reach, it's weirdly cute. And when he lifts his top shell up and we see his eyes, oh my gosh, this crab is awesome. And to round things off, we get the classic Disneyland TV show credits. Oh wait, there's still one more side. Kids is Kids starts off with a slightly unnerving title card. That's not a good sign. But then we get Ludwig von Drake. This guy's pretty cool. It's a shame he really isn't in anything anymore. I feel like Scrooge McDuck took him out of the tiny spotlight he had to begin with. So in this one, Ludwig is a child psychologist doing research for a book. He chooses a family to observe in their natural habitat, his words, not mine. That family is, of course, Donald and his nephews Huey, Dewey, and Louie. That means that all the shorts in here are going to be Donald shorts. Sounds repetitive, but I was pleasantly surprised to find it really wasn't. Ludwig himself is pretty funny. He just rambles about the weirdest things, and I can barely understand what he's saying most of the time. Kinda reminds me of someone, but for the life of me, I can't quite put my finger on who that might be. He also inserts himself into the shorts themselves, which is really weird to see, but I really liked it. First up is Donald's Happy Birthday. Donald's birthday is coming up, and his nephews want to buy him a present. So they spend the short trying to steal their piggy bank from Donald, so the present is a surprise. Once Donald finds out what they did, he confronts them in their treehouse and finds them with the box of cigars they were going to give him. This causes Donald to go completely berserk and stuff cigars in their mouths to teach them a lesson. Jesus Christ, no wonder this short isn't available anymore. The best part is the completely wrong moral Ludwig says at the end. Apparently, if you realize you've made a mistake as a parent, you should never admit defeat. Don't tell them you're wrong at all. Do not acknowledge your mistakes. That's a fun moral. Next up is the hockey champ? This one isn't on the back of the sleeve, though. They seriously didn't count this one on the list. There are 12 cartoons in this disc, not the 11 listed on the back, in 2 different places. Early Disney Home Video stuff really is a wild west of errors. This short's pretty uneventful, it's just them playing hockey. But at one point, Donald hangs by a noose. What the heck? I can't believe how dark some of these uncensored cartoons can get. Next up is Good Scouts. They go on a camping trip. Again, good stuff. And educational, too. Now I know you can't cut down a petrified tree. Good to know. But then, when Donald's blindfolded, this bear comes and licks the honey off his foot. Donald automatically assumes it's his nephews doing it? The implications that has are... You know, let's just go to the next short. So the next one is Don's Fountain of Youth. Donald's mad that the nephews are too distracted by their comic book to enjoy the beautiful scenery. I guess that whole thing about kids being too distracted by cell phones to enjoy nature has been around for longer than I thought. But then, once again, the short just includes something completely cursed. Donald tricks the kids into thinking he's getting younger from this so-called Fountain of Youth, so pretends he's a baby and acts like the nephews are his parents. This is horrifying. At this point, I got up to put my cup of tea in the dishwasher. But then I found out that the pause button on my decades-old LaserDisc player remote operates on the exact same frequency as the flash mode on my LED lights. So that was a fun nightmare. The next short is Soup's On, which opens with Donald Duck singing Zippity Doo Dah, a nice treat in old Disney stuff that highlights an era before Song of the South was rediscovered as extremely problematic. The nephews play Indians in the forest. That's interesting. This short escalates really weirdly. Like, first it's Donald getting the nephews to wash up for dinner, and that somehow leads to them tricking Donald into thinking he died. What the heck is up with these shorts? And now we're on the last short. This one is about the nephews trying to get Donald this car he won in a contest without knowing it. The weirdest thing about this one is that the nephews are portrayed as teenagers. The only other time I can think of this happening is Quack Pack, a show from the 90s. Really weird. Not as weird as them tricking Donald into filling up their gas tank by having one of them dress up as a girl and making Donald fall in love with him. Yeah. What the heck? We get the credits for Disney's Wonderful World of Color again, and that's the end.
This was much, much better than the first one. I know it's just a compilation of 2 decades-old television specials, but it's insane to think that 2 specials from 20 years prior did a better job at making me appreciate these shorts than the much more recent one that was specifically designed for that. Honestly though, there were some legitimately underrated shorts in this. It's just a shame that most of them contain scenes that absolutely would not fly by Disney's kid-friendly standards today. But it is interesting to see a side of Disney that they don't often let you see these days, if at all. Anyways, we're on to our final 2 discs. I'm excited to see what we have next, but more than that, I'm excited to just get this whole thing over with. I've been working on this video for over 4 months. Yeah. Alright, I like this. Alice in Wonderland is probably the film I'm most familiar with prior to watching out of the discs we've looked at so far. It's a good movie. Well, at least I think it is. I know it can be a bit divisive for some people. Well, I haven't seen the film in quite some time, so who knows? Maybe my personal thoughts on it have changed. There's only one way to find out. Actually, I'm just glad this film is extremely short, clocking in at just over 75 minutes according to the back of the sleeve. So, not as short as Dumbo, but still pretty darn short for a feature film. Anyways, let's journey down the rabbit hole and review the absolute mildest drug trip you will ever see in your life.
I'm sure if you're watching this video, you're at least somewhat familiar with the plot of Alice in Wonderland. If not, here's a basic rundown. Alice is a very curious girl who enjoys using her imagination over listening to her sister's history lesson. She sees a talking white rabbit running into a rabbit hole, and she follows him down the hole into Wonderland. Of course, the whole thing is a dream, but we're not supposed to know that yet. Alice as a character is fine. She is fine. She's not the best character, but she's not the worst. She talks quite a lot throughout the film, which can be a bit annoying at times. It's fine though, since she's the only character on screen for long periods of time in the film, so it'd be weird just not having anyone talk, I guess. I like that she's voiced by Catherine Beaumont, who also played Wendy in Peter Pan 2 years later. I think she does a great job with the role, and it's hard to imagine Alice without her voice. Actually, there's a couple recurring Disney actors in this film. The Cheshire Cat is played by Winnie the Pooh and the Stork from Dumbo. The Queen of Hearts is voiced by Verna Felton, who played the main lady elephant from Dumbo and the fairy godmother in Cinderella. The White Rabbit is played by Mr. Smee from Peter Pan as well. Even Alice's sister is played by the mother from Peter Pan. There's a lot of Peter Pan actors in this film. Weird. The strangest part of this film is that there really isn't any plot, besides Alice exploring Wonderland trying to get home. She's just running into new characters one at a time before meeting the next one separately. There really isn't any discernible connection between most scenes, like, is any story progression messed up if you were to move this house scene to before the walrus and the carpenter scene? Speaking of which, the walrus and the carpenter scene is one of the best parts of the film. It's a story sung by these two, Tweedledee and Tweedledum, who look horrifying in the Tim Burton version. The song is catchy and the story is pretty funny. There really isn't any moral or anything. It's this walrus and carpenter who come across a family of oysters and decide to eat them. They lure the oysters into this restaurant, and the walrus eats them all before the carpenter comes back with the sauce. There's no point to the story whatsoever, but that, in a way, follows the main theme of the movie, which is that there is no point. That's the trouble with reviewing a film like this. Its whole gimmick is being super bizarre and nonsensical. None of the scenes are supposed to make much sense, and that's what makes this film so unique from all the other Disney films. Looking at it from that angle, this is probably the most unique animated Disney film. The characters in this film are iconic. Even if you haven't seen it, I'm sure you're familiar with the White Rabbit, the Mad Hatter, the Queen of Hearts, the Caterpillar, among others. But the characters in this film are either extremely memorable or extremely forgettable, with not much in between. Like the Dodo, or the Chimney Sweep, who is literally just one of Ratigan's henchmen in The Great Mouse Detective, but we've got a long way before we talk about that movie. The Mad Hatter scene is iconic and for good reason. Ed Wynn gives it his all and creates such an insane character as a result. Although I don't think the March Hare gets nearly as much appreciation. Come on, he's cool too. The Tea Party in general is probably the most nonsensical part of the film, making it the funniest. I love that the White Rabbit shows up and the Mad Hatter and March Hare immediately start this elaborate destruction of his watch completely out of nowhere, and their only reasoning is that the watch is 2 days slow. That's just funny to me. The Cheshire Cat is also an interesting character. He almost seems to be helping Alice throughout the story, but he hits that perfect blend of seeming like Alice's hero, but in reality messing everything up for her just as much as the other characters. But the best character in this film is the Queen of Hearts. Verna Felton goes nuts with this role, and her design, movements, and especially the facial expressions are so, well, expressive, and it really helps make her shine as a character. The croquet scene is also really funny, and the Queen's sudden mood changes make it even better. I really like how unfairly Alice is treated throughout this whole film. It's such a contrast to how I think most people think this film is going to be like. Alice in Wonderland sounds like some sort of fantasy adventure movie where Alice makes a bunch of friends along the way. But no, every single person in this place hates Alice. Or if they don't hate her, they just mess with her and make things even more inconvenient. I remember watching this when I was little, and Alice finds a path that leads her home, and I was so happy for her. She was finally going to get back home. And then this stupid brush dog gets rid of the path. What the heck? Screw this stupid brush dog for making Alice so sad. Alice's progression through the film is really well done. At first, she's optimistic and very curious, but as the film progresses, she gets more and more fed up with all the stuff around her, all coming together when she berates the Queen in the courtroom scene near the end of the film. The songs in this film are fun, but the only ones that I really remember are the White Rabbit's theme, the Unbirthday song, the Rose Painting song, and the one the flowers sing. Now that sounds like almost all of them, but there are tons of songs in this film, some of which are only around 20 seconds long. Seriously, there are 16 songs in this movie. The ones I listed before are extremely memorable, but just looking at the song list, even after having just watched the movie, I have no idea what some of these songs even are. Surprisingly enough, the film's pacing really slows down near the middle. This film barely has any pacing to begin with, feeling more like a compilation of mini-adventures than anything else, but I just feel like the whole film comes to a stop when she enters this forest after the Mad Hatter scene. The song she sings here is sad and completely overshadowed by the Queen of Hearts immediately afterwards. The chase scene at the end is very dramatic and serves as a nice recap of all the crazy places Alice has visited. The music is pretty intense too. I like how it actually creates some tension, with Alice trying to wake herself up as everyone gets closer and closer to capturing her.
And that's Alice in Wonderland. Overall, it's a very good film. The nonsensical focus is definitely what makes this film very divisive. Some people like it, some people don't. I personally enjoy it. It's really not like any other Disney films, especially modern ones. I don't think we'll be seeing a film with as loose a plot as this one from Disney anytime soon. The release history of this film is actually really funny. It came out in 1951 to very lukewarm reception. But then they re-released it in the 70s, focusing heavily on the psychedelic aspect of this film for the marketing, and that release turned out to be a wild success. I don't know why, I just find that really funny, because I never really thought of this film as psychedelic. I always just thought of it as weird. While I do really like it, it's far from my favorite Disney film. It really does lag near the end of the film, where it feels like they were just padding out the runtime by having Alice meet all these random characters she only sees once and then never again. Alice herself isn't the most interesting protagonist, and the movie can be very hit or miss in terms of memorability. But even if you haven't seen the film, it's hard to imagine Alice in Wonderland without these specific character designs, and I think that's what makes the Walt Disney film so iconic. And with that, we have reached our final film in the Disney LaserDisc library of 1982. It's been
a long journey. We've had our ups and our downs, so let's hope that we end this off with a bang and get something absolutely wonderful to finish this whole journey off. Just don't get your hopes up. Well, I don't think any of us were expecting it to be an amazing film. I mean, yeah, we haven't watched it yet, but come on, another Christmas film? That's really dumb. A Disney Christmas gift apparently wasn't enough to celebrate the holidays with, now they gotta slap this thing onto store shelves too. I'm sure that was fine for people at the time, but come on, Christmas has been over for a while, and I don't really like this release because of that. Well, maybe this is actually really good. Or if not, maybe it's so bad it loops back around to being good like what a Disney Christmas gift did. It's short at the very least, only being on one side of a disc, so it's got that going for it. We've only got this left to watch before the end of 1982, so let's see if Disney had an at least semi-triumphant ending to a very strange year. The disc starts with another blank title screen with sleigh bells in the distance. I think having the sleigh bells is worse than if it was completely silent. Anyways, looks like we've got another short compilation. Well, at least the disc starts with a short. Well, it's this short film called Once Upon a Wintertime, which was a part of a 1949 package release from Disney called Melody Time. Surprisingly enough, I've actually seen Melody Time, so I've seen this short film. It's pretty good. It's got this art style that I like, although the weird snake-like horses kind of freak me out. The short is about this couple going on a date at an ice skating rink. The ice breaks apart, so this guy has to save this girl before she floats over a waterfall. It's a very well-made short with some calming, winter-esque music and some pretty good use of colors to express emotion. This is a pretty good start to the program. Huh. Oh, never mind. I just got deja vu for a second there. Forget it. Anyways, next up is Santa's Workshop. This short is probably the oldest one we've looked at so far. It was released in 1932, and it's pretty obvious. The short is very grainy, especially with the audio. Actually, let's play a game. Try and decipher what the elves are saying in this song. It's a pretty challenging game. We're the merry, merry men of the midnight sun. We work for Santa and have a lot of fun. So, yeah, it's just Santa and the elves building toys for Christmas. It's not very exciting, although this doll looks a lot like Goku from Dragon Ball Z. You know, Goku. I can't be the only one who thinks that, right? I also think this is the first thing we've seen so far that has legitimate blackface in it with this doll. Well, with how old these cartoons are, it was bound to happen at some point, I guess. I also like this super old tank design. It's left over from World War I before the iconic tank design we know today from World War II, which would happen a decade later. Weird. So yeah, Santa gets the toys ready, flies off towards this creepy yet familiar looking moon, and the short ends. Next up is the boring Night Before Christmas silly symphony, where it's just Santa and the toys sitting up a tree in this house for a long time. I guess the family didn't have a tree set up for Christmas, even though it's Christmas Eve. Also, what the heck, blackface again? Come on, Disney, you're better than that. Also, there's this moon that is more terrifying than anything in any of these movies so far. Why is this moon following me through these films? And why do I feel like I've seen it before? I think these films are making me question reality. Up next is 1935's On Ice. This one is just Mickey and the gang having fun on an ice skating rink. I forgot how wholesome the chemistry between Mickey and Minnie was in these early shorts. It's very charming watching them have fun together on the ice. Goofy goes ice fishing on the rink using some of the most barbaric methods I've ever seen. He feeds the fish tobacco and beats them with a club. Nobody let PETA watch this. Next up is Donald, and holy smokes, he has a really early design. Not only that, but he's a complete jerk to Pluto. He puts ice skates on Pluto, causing him to slip and catch his butt on fire. For the love of God, PETA, don't watch this. Donald gets blown away by the wind, but he gets saved by Mickey and rightfully beaten over the head with Goofy's club. Not a bad short, in my opinion. Next up is 1942's Donald's Snow Fight. Donald gets into an extremely elaborate, warlike snowball match with his nephews. The strangest part about this short is how weird the audio gets when the three nephews talk at the same time. It's obvious it's just the same audio layered 3 times over itself. Weird. Other than that, nothing else really happens in this short. On to the last short, which is Pluto's Christmas Tree. Mickey sets up a tree in his home without realizing Chip and Dale are living in it. Pluto finds out and hijinks ensue. It's a fine enough short. It's nothing too crazy, but it's definitely Christmassy, you know?
And that's it. Honestly, not a bad collection. If you're looking for a collection of classic Disney shorts that are seldom ever seen nowadays, this would be worth a watch. Even if it isn't quite the Christmas season yet, I still found myself enjoying most of these shorts. Although, something about these shorts feels familiar, like I've seen them before. Especially that moon. Wait a minute.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god.
No wonder these stupid shorts felt familiar. Half of them were already on the other Christmas one. Disney, why did you do this? If people bought both of these, they would be stuck with duplicates of most of these shorts, and these discs were not cheap, as I mentioned way back in the beginning of the video. Why not combine the two together and create some sort of huge Christmas thing, instead of releasing 2 separate discs that are identical for half of them? This is ridiculous. This whole thing is ridiculous. Okay. I'm glad I got that off my chest. And with that, we've reviewed every Walt Disney Home Video Laserdisc from 1982. I've mentioned a couple of times how this was not a very good time for Disney. It's hard to imagine if you weren't alive during this, but Disney was a failing company at this point, especially in the animation department. They just weren't pushing out the constant hits we see them put out today. It would take around 7 years for Disney to finally hit it big with one of their films, and until then, the journey will be long, bizarre, and mostly overlooked by Disney fans. This introduction into the home video market wasn't just a way of Disney celebrating their legacy. It represents a slowly dying company's desperate attempt to make back more money than they were losing. That's not to say everything they were doing was failing, but they weren't making quite as much money as the CEO wanted them to. Looking at what Disney's television presence was at the time, the choice for Laserdisc releases make a whole lot more sense. These films and specials were a big part of the wonderful world of Disney, so it makes sense that Disney would try to preserve these films themselves, rather than relying only on people who happen to record them off TV onto videotape. Their TV specials were still popular, so it makes sense that they would tread safe ground by releasing specials that had already found success on television. This review was a fascinating time capsule, and the rest of these videos will outline in great detail what the company was going through. The 90s will bring an explosion of both new and old films alike in rapid succession, rather than the spread out mediocrity we've been dealing with in the 80s. I'm sure 1983 will bring much of the same to the table, but only time will tell for sure. We really don't know what we'll be seeing from Disney in 1983. I mean, you could just look it up, which will tell you that instead of 15 films, Disney released 27 films in 1983. So, yeah, expect a video twice as long as this one next time. But hey, that's another year for another day. I'll see you all in like 6 months when I'm done with the next video. If I haven't died from exhaustion by then. Until then, have a good day everyone. Bye for now.